Imagine yourself in a world built on timber, rope, and ambition. The year is 1635. The air carries the scent of wet oak, salty breezes, and burning pitch. You're standing near the edge of Amsterdam's bustling harbor, where cranes made of wood creak under the weight of their loads and barefoot boys race down slick cobbled streets carrying messages to merchant captains. This is the heart of the Dutch Golden Age, a time when the Netherlands, a small patchwork of marshlands and canals, has transformed itself into a global powerhouse. Ships are being built faster than churches, coins are minted by the hour, and fortunes are made and lost overnight. But beneath the shimmering surface of trade and exploration lies a world of exhausting labor, constant risk, and lives pushed to the brink. Tonight we step softly into that world. No need to hurry. The past is waiting for us, steady and still, like a docked ship before its voyage. We'll begin where every journey must begin, not on the open sea, but in the shipyards, where dreams are made from planks and nails, and where a single mistake can cost 100 lives. Close your eyes if you wish. Let your thoughts slow. And now, let us begin with the rhythm of hammers echoing through the early morning fog. Chapter 1. Building a ship keel by lamplight in Amsterdam. It is not yet light. The stars are still faintly visible above the rooftops, and the moon hangs low and pale over the masts. In the dim orange glow of whale oil lamps, men are already hard at work. Their breath clouds in the chill, their hands rough from years of handling timber and tar. There's no fanfare. No morning bell, just the groan of wood and the whistle of the foreman as the day begins. You are among them now, crouched low beneath the skeleton of what will become a ship destined for the East Indies. Perhaps it will carry cloves and pepper. Perhaps it will never return. But none of that matters yet. Right now, it is just a keel, a spine of oak running down a dusty stretch of dock, surrounded by sawdust and iron nails the size of your hand. The scent of resin is strong. Your shirt sticks to your back with sweat, even in the cold. The work is repetitive but precise. One mistake in shaping a joint, one poorly aligned rib, and the entire vessel could break apart in rough waters. The foreman barks at a younger boy who has mismeasured a plank, smacking a rod against the beam to drive the point home. There's no room for kindness here. Time is money, and every hour the ship remains unfinished is a fortune lost in delay. The workers around you speak in clipped Dutch, some muttering prayers, others cursing softly. Many are recent arrivals from rural provinces, lured by the promise of wages and steady meals. But the promise often fades quickly. Injuries are common. Fingers crushed by falling beams. Eyes burned from splattered pitch. If you're lucky, it's just splinters. If you're not, it's the surgeon's knife, and no one leaves the shipyard whole. And yet, the city hums with purpose. Amsterdam is growing by the day. Warehouses line the canals, stacked high with silks from Bengal, sugar from Brazil, and porcelain from China. The shipyards are its lungs, breathing out vessels to every corner of the world. And men like you are its heartbeat, anonymous, aching, and essential. By midday, the fog lifts, and the sun casts sharp light across the harbor. A crowd gathers to watch the progress. They never touch the wood. They don't smell the pitch or feel the tremble in their knees from standing on planks for 12 hours. To them, this is a map of profits. To you, it is a reminder that your back will ache for the rest of your life. Lunch is a piece of salted herring and dark bread. You sit on a beam next to a man missing 2 fingers who tells you a story about a ship that cracked in half off the coast of Sumatra because the keel warped under pressure. They found pieces of it weeks later, scattered across the reefs. He laughs like it's a joke, but his eyes don't. By evening, your hands are blistered and your shoulders scream from lifting. But the keel is set, and the ribs begin to rise like a forest around you. The ship is taking shape. You wonder where it will go? Whether you'll sail on it? Whether it will make it to Batavia or vanish like so many others? You think of the families who will wait for it to return. You think of your own, if you have one. Or perhaps you are alone like many here, nameless and temporary. The lamps are lit again. The saw is quiet for a moment. The foreman blows his whistle, and the men begin to pack up. You don't speak. No one does. There's nothing left to say. You have survived another day. Far above, in the high windows of the Guildhall, the merchants toast another contract signed. They will sleep comfortably tonight, their hands soft, their beds warm. But in the yards, beneath the ship's rising hull, you lie down on a straw mat near the beams. You fall asleep to the scent of pitch, the sound of distant waves, and the knowledge that tomorrow it all begins again. Nothing in this world moves without the shipwright. But few ever remember his name.
Chapter 2. Hammered by salt and ice, CE life at sea as a Dutch sailor. The ship is ready. The timber is sealed, the sails stitched, and the hold filled with goods meant for foreign ports. You board at dawn with a linen sack holding your only belongings, an extra shirt, a blunt knife, and a tin mug. No ceremony marks your departure. No family waves from the shore. Just the creak of ropes and the cold slap of the wind off the North Sea. The ship groans as it pulls from its moorings, and with that, your new life begins. The sea, so beautiful from land, reveals its true nature within hours. The wind never stops. It whips across the deck, slapping your cheeks until they burn raw. Rain doesn't fall gently. It lashes sideways, needling into your clothes and seeping into your bones. There is no shelter from it. You quickly learn to tie everything you own to your hammock, because if it falls, it is gone. The ocean does not return what it takes. Your duties depend on your rank, but almost everyone ends up doing everything at some point. Hauling ropes, scrubbing decks, taking turns at the pump when the ship leaks, which it often does. The food is an insult. Salted fish so tough, it has to be beaten with a hammer before you can chew it. Ship's biscuit crawling with weevils. If you're lucky, there's a single onion or wedge of moldy cheese once a week. And water. Always the water stored in wooden barrels that sour after days in the sun, tasting like rot and iron nails. The ship rolls with the rhythm of the waves, and your body soon forgets what it's like to stand on unmoving ground. At first, you vomit, again and again, until there's nothing left. Then, if you survive that, the sickness passes. Or you simply become too tired to notice it anymore. You sleep in a hammock, shoulder to shoulder with the other men, in the dark belly of the ship. The air there is thick with sweat, damp wood, and the sour stench of unwashed bodies. You breathe shallowly to avoid it, but it seeps into your clothes, your skin, your lungs. The sounds never stop: creaking timbers, distant shouting, rats scratching, a man groaning from a broken rib or an infected tooth. If you wake up in the night, it's hard to tell whether it's still the same day. Storms come often. When they do, the world becomes noise. The sails crack like gunfire. Waves slam into the hull like cannonballs. You cling to anything you can, praying the ropes don't snap or the masts don't shear off. Men vanish overboard without a sound. There are no funerals at sea. One moment, someone is beside you. The next, there's only spray and wind. There is no privacy, no escape. The ship becomes its own universe, a floating prison of damp walls and shouting voices. Arguments flare over the smallest things: a stolen ration, an insult, a rumor. Fights erupt. Knives are drawn. The bosun keeps order with a length of rope and a heavy hand. Punishments are public, quick, and brutal. A man caught stealing rum might be tied to the mast and flogged until the deck runs wet. But there are quiet moments too, strange and almost gentle. Sometimes late at night, the sea calms and the stars spill across the sky like spilled sugar. You can hear only the creak of the rigging and the distant breathing of the men around you. In those moments, the ship feels like a living thing, groaning, shifting, dreaming. You forget for a second that you're surrounded by danger. You just lie still, rocked by the waves, and let your thoughts drift. Every man aboard has a story, but few tell them. Some are runaway debtors, some are orphans, press-ganged into service when no one would notice. A few are true sailors, proud of their craft. Most are just trying to survive. You learn quickly to read faces. Who will share a crust of bread, will slit your throat in the dark. Trust is rare, and friendships are more like brief truces. The days blur together. The sun rises. You work, you eat, you sweat, you sleep. Then it rises again. You lose track of time. Some sailors mark the wood of their bunks with a small blade, carving notches for each day. But even they forget eventually. Time at sea is circular. It's the same chores, the The same smells, the same fears, again and again. Scurvy creeps in slowly. Gums swell. Teeth loosen. Wounds refuse to heal. Your skin bruises without cause, and your legs ache at night with a dull, hollow pain. Some men go mad. Others simply stop waking up. The surgeon does what he can, mostly bleeding and shouting. There are no cures, only delays. You learn to chew anything green when you reach shore, if you're lucky enough to reach one. And then there are the rats. They're not afraid of you. They breed in the grain stores and fight under the hammocks at night. Once you wake to one crawling across your chest, you fling it away, heart racing, but no one else stirs. They're used to it. Will you be? Despite everything, the ship presses on. Past the rocky shores of Scotland, past the gray storms of the Atlantic, and into warmer waters. Each day brings new wariness, but also the faint hope of land, of coin in hand, of stepping onto a dock and breathing freely again. You tell yourself that if you can just hold on a little longer, it will be worth it. But the truth is, many don't. 1 in 5 sailors never makes it home. Some drown, some die of disease. Some vanish in distant ports, robbed and forgotten. The sea does not keep records. And still, when the wind is fair and the sails are full, when the ship cuts clean through the water and the horizon glows with sunlight, you almost understand why some come back to it. There is something ancient in the rhythm of waves, something quieting in the vastness. You feel, for a fleeting moment, part of something larger than yourself, not safe, not comfortable, but real.
That feeling is rare and never lasts. Because before long the wind turns, the sails luff, and the ship slows to a crawl. You enter what the sailors call the doldrums, long patches of windless sea where the sun bakes the deck and tempers rise with the temperature. You scramble with the others to reef the sails before they split. It looks like a mirage at first, just a shimmer of green and brown on the edge of the world. But it sharpens, grows, and takes form. Palm trees, thatched huts, traders in canoes paddling toward your ship before the anchor even drops. This is what the voyage was for. If you walk past children playing barefoot in the sand, and women carrying baskets of fish or rice on their heads. You see colors you've never seen in Amsterdam. Hear languages you don't understand. Feel the weight of a different sun on your back. The reward, if any, comes at great cost. But still men sign up. Still ships leave the harbor full. Some do it for the dream of wealth. A lucky voyage, a bonus paid in silver, a small house purchased on the edge of the city. A pattern that becomes familiar. The flapping of sails, the slap of the sea, the calls of the watch. You step onto the dock unsteady, like a child learning to walk again. The streets feel too narrow, the smells too sharp. You pass by a baker's stall, and the scent of warm bread nearly makes you cry. New men boarding. Young faces full of hope or fear. You know what they don't yet. What lies ahead? And you wonder if anyone will tell their stories when they are gone. It's not joy. It's memory and grief and hunger all at once. You find comfort in it, strange as it sounds. Others swear never to sail again. They take their pay and vanish into the city, trying to rebuild a life with bones still shaped by the sea. A few become rich, most do not. Some are never heard from again, buried under a pile of debts or drowned in a tavern brawl. This ship becomes a part of you and you a part of it. Its timbers creak like joints. Its sails breathe like lungs. And you know its moods. You sense when it's in trouble. You dream in its language. Others do it because they have no other choice. Prison, debt, disgrace, all can be swept away by the promise of a clean ledger and open water. It is beautiful in its own way, but also foreign, uncertain. The locals know you come for profit. Some greet you with smiles, others with silence. A few with quiet resistance. You are not a guest. You are a visitor with a ship and cannons, and they never forget it. Spices, textiles, ivory, gold. Dysentery, typhoid, fevers that leave men shaking until their lips turn blue. Amsterdam starts to fade like a dream. The faces of family, the sound of church bells, the smell of peat smoke from a city chimney, all of it feels unreal. Life aboard the ship becomes your reality. The ropes in your hands, the sway of your feet, the constant ache in your lower back. You are no longer who you were when you boarded. The sea has changed you, and not gently. The surgeon can only offer bitter concoctions and crude tools. There is no real medicine, only hope. Some men are laid in their hammocks and never wake. You hear them in the quiet hours, half believing. Sometimes a man will wake screaming from a dream, claiming he saw the devil standing on the mast. Other times, it's just the rats again. Always the rats. Their bodies are sewn into canvas, weighted with stones, and lowered into the sea with a prayer barely whispered. The goods the Dutch East India Company prizes above all else. The captain and merchants go ashore, cloaked in formality and ambition, while the rest of you stay aboard, waiting, watching, sometimes wondering if you'll be allowed to set foot on land at all. Everything becomes a blur of orders shouted in Dutch, ropes whipped into your arms, salt spray blinding your eyes. If you freeze, even for a moment, someone could die. Or you might. There's no time to think, only to move, to survive, to brace yourself against the cold fury of the sea. The stillness is maddening. You wait for days with no movement. The air becomes syrupy and thick. The wood of the hull groans under the heat, and the water barrels begin to stink even worse than before. Men lie sprawled in shade, shirts off, skin blistered, lips cracked. No one talks much. It's too hot to speak. When the wind finally returns, it doesn't come kindly. It hits like a fist, slamming the ship sideways and tearing lines from their posts. At last, after weeks at sea, a coastline rises on the horizon. Port towns are dangerous, not because of the locals, but because of what happens when men who've been confined for months taste freedom. Taverns fill quickly. Fights break out. Coin is stolen, traded, gambled away. Brothels open their doors and to close just as fast when trouble starts. Some sailors disappear into the winding alleys, never seen again. Some reappear bloodied, clutching a bottle or a stolen trinket. Everyone carries their own burden of choices. You learn to keep your head down and your coin close. You might be sent ashore for supplies, wood, fresh fruit, barrels of clean water. When the ship departs again, it is heavier with cargo but lighter in morale. Illness begins to spread faster. The longer you are away from home, the harder it becomes to remember it. Sometimes you wonder what it's all for. The pay is poor, the danger constant. There are stories too. Whispers of ghost ships that sail with no crew, of islands where sailors vanish, of treasure buried by mutineers. And yet, amidst the fear and hardship, there is a rhythm. When at last you return to Amsterdam, if you return at all, you are not the same. Some sailors come back and leave again within days. They cannot adjust to life on land. The rooms feel too small, the air too still. You look back once at the ship as it's loaded for its next journey. Because the sea does not keep records, and the wind forgets all names. Chapter 3. The Sinking of the Batavia. The Batavia left Texel in October of 1628. She was a fine ship, large and new, freshly built by the Dutch East India Company. She stretched more than 130 feet from bow to stern. Her hold packed tightly with silver coin and fine goods meant for the markets of the East. From the chill of the Netherlands, the ship would follow the route around Africa, then across the vast and violent Indian Ocean to Java. There were known hazard storms off the Cape, pirates in the Mozambique Channel, and the unpredictable tempers of men confined for too long together. But no one suspected what fate truly awaited them. They planned to stage a fake accident, provoke disorder, and take command once the officers were dead or distracted. With the treasure on board, they would sail to a lawless island and begin a new life of wealth, free from the authority of the VOC. It was madness, but not an uncommon dream among desperate men trapped in floating prisons. Her hull gleamed with tar and paint, her sails strong and white, filled with promise. There were more than 300 people aboard, sailors, soldiers, merchants, and passengers. Some were seasoned, others sailing for the first time. He sailed more than 1,500 miles to reach Java, an astonishing feat of navigation and endurance. But he left behind more than 200 men, women, and children, stranded with little food and no protection, in the company of a man already planning something monstrous. At first, he pretended to be concerned, rationing supplies and organizing shelters, but this was only to gain trust. His real plan was to reduce the number of mouths to feed and to do it by force. They were far off course. Charts were misread or ignored. And the land ahead was not welcoming, but treacherous. A low-lying coral reef, hidden just beneath the waterline. He gathered a group of loyal followers, mostly younger crewmen, and promised them power, women, and safety. Then the killings began. Groups of survivors were sent to distant islands under the guise of exploration, then slaughtered in the night. Cornelis and his men used knives, stones, even bare hands. There were no rules, no law, only fear. The Batavia struck it head-on. The hull split open with a shuddering crack, throwing men to the deck. Water poured in. And all the while, Cornelis wandered the beaches in fine clothing taken from the dead, convinced of his divine right to rule. Screams echoed. The ship groaned and listed violently. Sails tore loose and snapped in the wind like thunder. There was no warning, no mercy. Arguments over discipline, drunken insults. Mutinous talk shared in the shadows of the lower decks. But above, the voyage went on. The ship passed the coast of Africa. A few froze, clutching at rigging or prayer beads. They built makeshift weapons, planned ambushes, and held the line. When Pelsart finally returned weeks later with a rescue ship, he found not a group of castaways awaiting help, but a battlefield littered with the scars of civil war. Within minutes, the lower decks were flooding. Barrels and crates floated free, crashing into the walls. The officers attempted to organize the crew, but it was too late. The Batavia was dying, stopped briefly at Cape Town, then turned into the open waters of the Indian Ocean. Flat, dry, barren. No trees, no fresh water, just sand, rock, and blazing sun. Yet the survivors made it ashore dripping, injured, traumatized, but alive. They had no idea that their nightmare was only beginning. By now, the crew had grown restless. Food supplies were dwindling. Illness spread through the lower decks. Passengers complained of heat and filth. And beneath it all, the quiet conspiracy festered. They had little in common, except that they were all now at the mercy of the same sea. The voyage would last nearly 8 months, if it succeeded at all. From the beginning, the Batavia carried something dangerous beneath her decks. And it wasn't just the treasure. Her commander, Francisco Pelsart, was a man of rank and wealth, but uncertain authority. Below him, the skipper, Orion Jacobs, resented his command and simmered with quiet rage. And then there was Geronimus Cornelis, a failed apothecary turned merchant, fleeing disgrace, and carrying with him a mind already warped by ambition and cruelty. The tensions that would eventually tear the ship apart began with whispers. Cornelis and Jacobs were plotting to seize the ship. They never got the chance. The sea had other plans. One morning in early June, the lookout cried land. But it was not Java. Panic spread instantly. Some tried to launch boats, others leapt into the surf. Miraculously, many survived the wreck. The reef had struck just off a chain of tiny islands in what is now Western Australia. These were no paradise. Pelsart took a small boat and a handful of loyal men and set off in search of help. Geronimus Cornelis saw his moment. With the ship's commander gone and the remaining officers outnumbered, he quickly assumed control. He disarmed the soldiers under false pretenses. At first, they were quiet, a man who complained too much, a boy who disobeyed. But they escalated quickly. The islands became a nightmare. Women were seized and claimed as property. Children were forced to watch their fathers die. Those who resisted were tortured or starved. He was no longer a merchant. He saw himself as a prophet. And those who followed him believed it, or at least pretended to. But not everyone submitted. A group of soldiers, secretly armed and quietly organizing, began to resist from another island. When Pelsart finally returned, the sky was clear and the water lay still, belying the horror that had unfolded on those islands. He saw the scattered tents, the makeshift graves, and the hollow eyes of the survivors who lined the shore. Some were too weak to stand. Others ran to the boat, sobbing without sound. What greeted him was not a castaway rescue, but a reckoning. He soon learned what had happened. The stories emerged hesitantly at first, in fragments and whispers. Then, with growing clarity, survivors told of Cornelius' killings, the forced labor, the executions, the cruelty. Women described the unspeakable humiliations. Children clung to their mothers for what was left of them. The soldiers who had resisted were gaunt but proud, standing together with makeshift spears still in hand, ready to defend themselves even from the arriving officers. Cornelius didn't resist capture. He greeted the returning commander with eerie calm, as if he had done nothing wrong. In his mind, perhaps, he hadn't. He had taken power when it was available. He had shaped a world from ruin. That it was soaked in blood seemed to matter little to him. He was bound, shackled, and held aboard the rescue vessel, but still he smiled. Pelsert faced a grim task. There were no proper courts, no jails. Justice had to be delivered immediately and publicly. He convened a tribunal right there on the island. Witnesses were called, accusations laid out, evidence described in terrible detail. The bodies, when found, told their own story. Few denied what had happened. The only question was what to do with those responsible. Several of Cornelius' followers were executed on the spot. Ropes were strung up from ship's rigging, and men were hanged while the wind rustled the sails above them. Others were marooned, left on the same barren islands, to die slowly. Cornelius himself had both hands cut off before being hanged. A rare punishment meant to signify the depth of his betrayal and the weight of his crimes. The Dutch East India Company, ever practical, recorded these punishments not as an act of moral outrage, but as an example to others. Order had been restored, the goods salvaged. The mission, in their view, salvaged. The human cost was acknowledged briefly in logs and letters, then forgotten by most. But the survivors did not forget. Those who returned to Batavia, and later to the Netherlands, carried the scars for life. Some found work again, others did not. A few women bore children conceived during those weeks of terror. Most never spoke of what had happened in full. And for many, the sight of coral or the sound of waves on a reef brought back memories they could never quite escape. The wreck itself remained where it had struck, slowly crumbling into the sea. For centuries, it was swallowed by time. Only in the 20th century did divers rediscover the remains of the Batavia. Her timbers half buried in sand, her cargo scattered like bones. The story resurfaced, strange and awful. Not a tale of daring, but a caution. Not a legend of glory, but a reminder of how thin the line is between civilization and collapse. To sail the oceans in the 17th century was always a risk. Storms, starvation, scurvy, mutiny, all were part of the journey. But the Batavia showed another danger, the danger of isolation, power without limits, and the brutal instincts that emerge when survival becomes uncertain. It wasn't the sea that claimed the most lives in that voyage. It was human hands. Even today, the story feels unreal. That so much violence could take place in such a short time. Among people who had shared bread, who had prayed beside one another, who had boarded the same ship with the same destination in mind. And yet, history reminds us that fear, desperation, and unchecked power often breed something worse than the sea ever could. There's a museum now in Western Australia where pieces of the Batavia are preserved. You can see the recovered hull, the ornate carvings meant to impress faraway markets. You can walk along the skeleton of the ship and imagine what it must have felt like, stepping aboard for the first time, unaware that its final destination was not Java, but a reef in the middle of nowhere. The museum also holds shackles and tools, not just of sailing, but of control. A reminder that the voyage was never only about exploration or trade. It was about domination, ambition, and the quiet violence that followed European ships wherever they went. The Batavia was not alone in its story, only unusually well documented. And so it endures. A shipwreck, not just in the literal sense, but as a symbol of moral collapse. A voyage remembered not for its destination, but for the nightmare it became along the way. There is something unsettling about the quiet ending. The ship lies still. The water flows gently over its bones. The reef remains unchanged, indifferent. and the wind that once carried its sails now whispers to no one. In the end, the Batavia reminds us that not every story of the sea is one of discovery or courage. Some are warnings, carved not in stone, but in memory. Chapter 4. The Vach Office, Ledgers, and Empire. Imagine, for a moment, that you are no longer aboard a ship braving waves and storms, but standing in the hushed interior of a building along Amsterdam's Herendrecht Canal. The air smells faintly of old paper and ink, a quiet scent that settles on your clothes and fingertips. Outside, the harbor churns with life ropes pulled taut, barrels rolling over wet stone, sailors shouting in half a dozen languages. But inside this high-ceilinged room, there is only the scratch of quill on parchment and the soft creak of leather-bound ledgers being opened. You are in the heart of the Dutch East India Company's operations. Known as the VOC, the Verenigde Oostindische Company was not just a trading firm. It was, for a time, the largest and most powerful corporation the world had ever seen. From this very office, decisions were made that rippled across continents. A signature here could launch a ship to Sumatra or fund a military expedition in Ceylon. Another signature might send spices to Antwerp, silver to Japan, or troops to a distant island no Dutchman had yet seen. The room is cold despite the brazier glowing faintly in the corner. Heavy windows let in gray daylight, illuminating rows of desks where clerks work in silence. They wear wool coats and lace collars, their hair combed precisely, their posture stiff with discipline. Each has his own task-copying manifests, checking inventories, recording the arrival of goods from the Indies. These men do not shout or gesture. They do not argue. They calculate. They record. They obey. At the head of the room sits the bookkeeper, older than the rest, his face lined with years of careful thinking. He oversees the great ledger, a tome as thick as a man's arm, where every ship's journey is reduced to numbers. The name of the vessel, the weight of its cargo, the cost of repairs, the number of survivors, the profits expected, the losses endured. All of it inked in precise, looping script. This is where the empire becomes real. Not in the jungles of Java or the ports of Malacca, but in columns of numbers and lines of debt. The spice trade is not romantic here. It is arithmetic. If a sailor dies, there is a notation. If a ship sinks, there is a calculation. Even mutiny, that most unpredictable of events, has a financial consequence that must be tabulated. There is no room in this office for stories. Only totals. You walk past shelves lined with letters from colonial governors. Some are complaints about shortages. Others are pleas for reinforcements or warnings of rebellion. Each letter is opened, read, and logged. Decisions will be made later by directors seated in paneled boardrooms upstairs, men whose wigs are powdered and whose hands rarely touch rope or soil. These men speak of supply chains, market shares, strategic alliances. They sip warm wine while discussing war. They chart the world from memory, each new colony a dot on a map, each dot a potential dividend. And yet, there is order here. Precision. The VOC ran on systems, on schedules, on layers of accountability few medieval empires ever imagined. Ships were inspected, inventories double-checked, payments documented with obsessive care. Even captains could be punished if they failed to produce receipts for every barrel of pepper or every sack of nutmeg. The company believed in control, and it had the means to enforce it. But if you look closely, behind the order lies a more complicated picture. In the ledgers, there's a section for human cargo. Not often, not every voyage, but there it is, neatly written. A shipment of slaves acquired in West Africa, sold in Batavia. Prices recorded, losses noted. If some died in transit, there was no paragraph of grief. Just a figure in the margin, like any other spoilage. They were listed the same way as cinnamon or indigo. A product, an expense, a profit. Even within these silent halls, morality was silent. The numbers did not speak of suffering. They simply told the truth of money, and there is more. One letter, set aside, there's a red mark, a sign of urgency. Inside, a captain reports that his crew forced a Port S surrender by firing cannons into the town square. Dozens killed. The town's elders begged for mercy. The spices were taken. The town left burning. The report is calm, factual, written without emotion. At the bottom, the commander notes the expected profit from the spices taken and how much of that would return to shareholders in Amsterdam. This is how the VOC expanded. Not only through trade, but through calculated violence. Armies were deployed not for defense, but to ensure that competitors stayed away and locals did not bargain too hard. Fortresses were built beside rivers, not to protect people, but to control goods. Treaties were signed at gunpoint, cities blockaded, rival traders imprisoned or killed. The company operated as both merchant and monarch. And from this office, all of it was orchestrated. Not with swords, but with stamps. Not with cannons, but with contracts. The men in this room would never see the smoke rising from distant shores, but they would see the returns in the annual reports. They would know that investment had paid off, that the company was growing. The irony was that many of these men considered themselves civilized, educated, pious. They went home at night to read the Bible, to teach their children to write neatly, to pray for the safety of the fleet. They did not think of the slaves in the hold or the weeping villagers in Ceylon. Those were faraway things. In their world, everything could be balanced on a page, and yet the pages piled up. And yet the pages piled up. Row after row, year after year, they told the story of an empire expanding not in territory alone, but in influence and procedure and bureaucracy so thick and methodical that even its cruelty appeared clean. These offices didn't smell of blood. They smelled of parchment and sealing wax, of dried ink and polished oak. But every ledger line whispered of someone's hunger, someone's loss, somewhere far away from the quiet of Amsterdam. The clerks rarely spoke of what the numbers meant. Most of them had never left the Netherlands. They were born in cities, educated in small schools, apprenticed into the company at a young age. Their parents were tailors or millers, or perhaps former sailors too injured to continue at sea. For the clerks, this life was safer, stable, respected. To serve the VOC was to join something immense and efficient, something praised in sermons and admired across Europe. After all, the Dutch economy bloomed on the backs of these balances. But every so often, a clerk's curiosity got the better of him. Perhaps he paused while recording a shipment. He might notice the number of deaths on a voyage had doubled, or that a payment had been made to silence a witness in the Indies. Perhaps he asked a question he shouldn't have, or he read a letter twice instead of logging it and passing it on. Those who dwelled too long on such things were often moved to quieter departments. One or two disappeared from the records entirely. The VOC tolerated many things. Dissent was not one of them. Still, rumors found a way to drift through the corridors. Tales of captains who poisoned entire villages when they refused to trade, of forts built on the bones of slaves, of bribes paid to European rivals to stay silent. These were whispered at taverns or passed in folded notes between apprentices, but they never appeared in the ledgers. The ledgers were pristine. The ledgers only recorded the price of pepper, the weight of silver, and the number of barrels loaded onto the next eastbound ship. Upstairs, the atmosphere was different. Here sat the directors, men of means and power, their offices filled with paintings, maps, and cabinets of curiosities. Some had ivory carvings from Africa, others coined from Japan or scrolls from China. These were not merely decorations. They were trophies, proof of reach, evidence that the world, in all its chaos and color, could be collected, cataloged, and monetized. The directors met weekly around a long table carved from imported teak. They spoke Latin or formal Dutch, depending on the mood. They rarely discussed people. They discussed routes, yields, margins, market saturation. A rebellion in the East Indies might be mentioned only as a disruption in cinnamon flow. A famine in Ceylon became a note on price inflation. Everything was abstract. Everything could be contained within the neat boundaries of commerce. It was in one of these meetings, as records show, that a director suggested shifting slave labor from one colony to another to offset sugar shortages. No debate followed. It was simply noted, approved, and filed. The men moved on to discuss ship construction costs. The human lives involved were no more than variables in a formula. Despite its coldness, the company was remarkably effective. Its ships sailed farther, its traders negotiated harder, and its fort stood longer than most of its rivals. The VOC was not designed for kindness. It was designed for dominance. It achieved that not just with might, but with consistency, with paperwork, with an invisible net of control stretched across oceans. And for a time, it worked. But cracks began to appear. Some were small errors in inventory, unexplained disappearances of cargo. Others were more troubling violent uprisings in Java. Corruption among middlemen in Batavia, ships vanishing without explanation. At first, these were written off as exceptions. But exceptions grew more frequent. The system, once so tight and orderly, began to sag under its own weight. One of the company's own inspectors, a man named Hendrik Hock, once wrote in a private diary that the VOC has built its fortress upon sand, though every stone is labeled and priced. He was never promoted again. The diary vanished. But his words remain, passed down quietly among scholars who later studied the collapse. The wealth the VOC accumulated was staggering. It funded churches, universities, canals. It shaped cities and bankrolled wars. But that wealth rarely trickled down. Sailors died penniless. Laborers in the colonies toiled without wages. Even the clerks in the Amsterdam office, those men who inked every transaction with such care, saw little reward beyond the promise of job security. They served a machine that did not remember them. Eventually, the machine slowed. Wars in Europe drained resources. Competition from the British and French tightened margins. Scandals eroded public trust. By the late 18th century, the once mighty VOC was drowning in debt. Its bureaucracy, once admired, became bloated and paralyzed. In 1799, the company was formally dissolved. Its possessions were transferred to the Dutch government. Its ledgers closed for good, but the legacy remained, not just in the cities it helped build or the routes it mapped, but in the idea that profit and power could be pursued at a global scale through contracts, logistics, and trade. The VOC was not only a historical entity. It was a prototype, a blueprint for corporations that would come later, bigger, faster, even more impersonal. If you walk past the old VOC building in Amsterdam today, it looks quiet. Ivy creeps along the brickwork. Tourists take photographs. Inside, some rooms have been restored. Others are used as archives. The scent of ink and paper has faded. The ledgers are stored behind glass. No one writes in them now. And yet, the past is still here. You can almost hear the scratch of a quill. Almost feel the weight of a decision made far away that changed the life you'll never know. The building does not speak, but if it did, it would speak in numbers. Cold, clean, and final. Because in the Empire of Ink, nothing screamed. Nothing wept. But everything was counted. Chapter 5. Chained in the Hold. The slave trade at Cape Coast. Now imagine the sun no longer muted by northern clouds, but hanging hot and heavy in the sky over the western coast of Africa. The air is different here, thicker, saltier, charged with the distant scent of ocean and something else, something harder to name. You step off a Dutch vessel onto soil that feels unfamiliar beneath your boots. This is Elmina. Or perhaps it is Cape Coast. The name hardly matters. The function is the same. Before you stands a fortress, its whitewashed walls defiant against the haze. It was built first by the Portuguese, taken by the Dutch, and now manned by soldiers with muskets and brass buttons, their faces shining with sweat. It treats slaves like it treats sugar, tobacco, or tin, as units of trade, as lines in a ledger. The captains negotiate prices in the offices above, arguing over age, health, strength. A healthy young man fetches more than a woman. Children are bundled into group prices, not by name but by number. A clerk stands with a board, making marks as each person is led across the gangplank. Women are separated from men. Children clump together, clinging to one another in silence. There is no screaming. He receives a sealed letter, Instructions for the plantation owner who awaits the shipment in Suriname or Curacao. Behind it, the fort remains, its flag fluttering gently in the breeze. Another shipment will arrive soon. The routine is practiced, perfected. This is not an exception. It is a process. The value of the cargo is noted. So many guilders, minus estimated losses. The Dutch guards talk among themselves, drink from metal cups, smoke pipes to mask the stench. One young clerk, newly arrived, turns away as he hears the chains clink below. He asks his superior if he may work in another post. He's told to toughen up or leave. He says nothing more. There are always losses. They are anticipated, calculated, and accepted. They do not know where they are. They do not know who the Dutch are, but they understand enough to know they are no longer free. Only the shuffling of feet and the groan of timber beneath them. They are led into the lower deck of the ship, into the hold where wooden shelves await them, stacked like crates in a storeroom. The traders don't speak the language of the captives. Buckets sit in corners to collect waste. The heat intensifies as more bodies are packed in. Some begin to cry. Others murmur prayers. Most remain silent, conserving what little strength they have left. Above them, sailors secure the hatch, closing out the last breath of daylight. The hold plunges into a darkness that will last for weeks. They do not need to. A gesture, a nod, a handful of coin, and the transaction is complete. Dutch traders move briskly between arched stone corridors, checking crates, writing numbers, speaking in clipped tones. The architecture is thick and simple, made to withstand humidity and siege. A group is being brought up. They are to be loaded onto the ship that waits in the harbor, its sails furled and barrels stacked high with stale provisions. The people climb the step, slowly, many stumbling, pulled by guards or beaten forward with sticks. Their eyes are dull. Their bodies thin. No one fights. Resistance has long since been bled out or beaten down. Beneath your feet is packed earth, though in some parts it's worn smooth by the passing of too many feet. Everything feels still. And yet, below, in the cellars beneath the walls, the silence begins to crack. Above the gate is the insignia of the Dutch West India Company. It is both welcome and warning. Men, women, children. They crouch in the corners, some shackled by the neck or wrist, others lying too weak to move. The air is close, humid, almost unbreathable. Light comes only from the torches and oil lamps carried by the guards, which flicker and cast long shadows on the stone. The floor is bare, no straw, no mats. Only the ground and the heat and the waiting. This place is not a colony in the usual sense. It is a warehouse of people. Inside, the courtyard is quiet. Too quiet for a place so full. There, in rooms with no windows, sit hundreds of human beings. These people were taken from the interior. Some by force, some by betrayal. Captured in raids or sold by rival tribes, dragged to the coast through jungle paths and narrow trails that many never survived. Some were marched for weeks. Others were born into this cycle and have never known anything else. Now they wait, marked by chalk symbols and scars, to be loaded into ships and carried across the Atlantic. Few understand where they are going. Fewer still will survive the journey. The Dutch West India Company is not the first to traffic in human flesh, but it is among the most efficient. There's no ceremony, no illusion, only the reality of commerce stripped bare. You hear it now. A gate opens. Chains rattle. Orders barked in Dutch echo down the narrow stairwells. At the dock, the cargo is counted again. There is barely enough space to lie flat. The ceiling is so low that even the shortest must bend to stand. You remain above for now. The captain signs the manifest, confirming the cargo has been received. The ship pulls away from the coast slowly, its hull creaking as it begins the long middle passage. Back inside the fortress, more captives wait. Their turn will come. Down in the dungeons, the newest captives listen to footsteps above. Above, the ink dries on a new order, another voyage, another price. Above, the ink dries on a new order, another voyage, another price. And below deck, The ship's hold begins to feel less like a space and more like a wound sealed, dark, breathing with the heavy rhythm of suffering. It is not quiet. In the dark, sounds travel without end. Coughs echo. Chains rattle. He didn't last. Too weak. Gone in the night. There are no names. The logbook receives a line cargo lost, and the journey continues. It is a task, not a tragedy. The captain worries only that too many losses will cut into profit. Just enough for a few gulps. The captives reach for it blindly, eyes too dry to weep. One woman, very young, takes a sip and then passes the bucket to an older man beside her. No words are exchanged. There is no language left for what they feel. He instructs the surgeon to watch for signs of illness, to cull the weak if necessary, to keep the others alive just long enough. The ship's carpenter collapses while repairing a beam. A sailor dies of fever in his hammock, yet the voyage must continue. No one speaks of the hold. No one questions the morality of the cargo. It is legal. It is lucrative. It is part of the system. They vanish in storms or run aground on unfamiliar shores. A few are seized by pirates. And on rare occasions, the captives revolt. After their voyages, never speak of what they saw. Some return home with hollow eyes, broken minds, touch the walls where iron rings once held shackles. But it does not disappear. The stones remember. The sea remembers. And for those who passed through the gates of Cape Coast, whose names were never written, who vanished into ships and sugar fields, memory is all that remains. Some weep, some stare in silence. Others take photographs and leave. The sea outside is still as blue as ever. Waves lap gently against the stone, indifferent. Or nightmares that will not fade. Others go again. Some even rise in rank. They become captains and then governors. They speak fluently in markets and coins, but never again in conscience. A chain breaks. A guard is overpowered. Knives appear from nowhere. For a few terrible minutes, the lower deck becomes chaos. Men fight with fists, with iron shackles, with their bare teeth. Some reach the top deck only to be cut down. The crew responds with gunfire. The rebellion ends, always, in blood. Afterwards, punishment is swift. Bodies are thrown overboard, the hatches sealed tighter, rations cut. The message is clear. Resistance means death. The wind does not wait for morning. Sometimes someone sings softly in a language the sailors do not understand. Other times, there are screams, not long ones. Just sharp, sudden cries that taper into silence. They stop quickly. There is little energy to waste. Branding irons mark human flesh. Overseers carry whips. The work is endless. Lives are measured in seasons, not years. But that is another place, another chapter. For now, the voyage continues. One ship. The trade continues. One ship arrives as another departs. Forts along the coast expand. Their walls reinforced, their cells deepened. New captives arrive daily, sometimes sold by their own rulers. Sometimes taken in raids conducted with the help of European muskets. The system feeds itself. Guns for people. People for sugar. Sugar for profit. The Leusden wrecked off the coast of Suriname in 1738. As the ship began to sink, the crew escaped to shore, but before leaving, they locked the hatches on the hold. Over 600 captives drowned, trapped inside. The records list them as cargo loss, nothing more. The middle passage is a kind of suspended time. You drift through it with no sense of days or direction. For those chained in the hold, hours become meaningless. Hunger dulls the senses. Thirst claws at the tongue. The rocking of the ship becomes part of the body. Some vomit, others faint. Death creeps in without drama. Sometimes he offers lime water to delay scurvy. Sometimes he does nothing. He, too, is just trying to survive the voyage. He has heard stories of crews driven mad by the smells, the cries, the press of death. Some captains drink constantly. Others grow violent, but most grow numb. When a body goes still, it is unchained, lifted without ceremony, and dropped into the sea. If spotted by another ship, there is no reason to suspect what lies below. The officers chat quietly over salted meat. The bosun oversees the sailors cleaning the deck. On Sundays, the Dutch crew gathers for scripture reading. The captain reads aloud from the Book of Psalms, his voice firm and clear. No one mentions the groaning below. No one wonders if the verses carry through the wood. One splash, one less mouth to feed. A space opens only to be filled again. Loss is routine. The Dutch sailors speak of the dead with detachment. But the surgeon's tools are not made for healing. He has little more than vinegar and rum. Above deck, the ship appears like any other merchant vessel. The sails are neat. The flag flies proudly. Rain brings brief relief. Barrels are left open to catch fresh water. A few buckets are lowered into the hold. The ship nears the equator. The heat turns from stifling to cruel. Air no longer circulates. Even the crew begins to fall ill. Some ships never make it, but sometimes even the company's precision fails to erase the human cost. And still, on the plantations where these people are delivered, new horrors await. Fields stretch for miles, and labor begins before the sun rises. Back in Amsterdam, the ledgers show a healthy return. Investors see dividends. The VOC directors nod approvingly at the numbers, but the system leaves scars, not just on the bodies of the enslaved, but on the souls of those who enforced it. Some Dutch sailors. The forts along the African coast still stand today. Many have been turned into museums. Visitors walk through the old gates, hear the stories. History often fades. They were treated as numbers. But they were people. The canals of Amsterdam sparkle in the winter light. Ice forms along the edges, catching sunlight in fractured sheets. Skaters glide across frozen surfaces. Children toss snowballs in the streets. And on the wind, mingling with chimney smoke and the sweet smell of baked bread, there's a hint of something rarer. A scent of possibility. The promise of profit. You walk past shop windows where flowers are painted in miniature frames, crimson blossoms with white streaks, golden petals rimmed in deep violet, shapes too strange and too perfect to be real. But they are. Tulips, once simple blooms from Ottoman gardens, now the obsession of an entire nation. Grown from bulbs no bigger than your thumb, they have become symbols of status, of daring, of dreams. And people are buying them with the desperation usually reserved for war or religion. It is the year 1636. The Dutch Republic is flourishing. Trade routes span the globe. Art thrives. Science advances. But behind the elegance of lace collars and tall hats is a hunger that cannot be sated by silver or spices. It seeks beauty. It seeks rarity. And above all, it seeks more. Tulips are no longer just flowers. They are futures. Each bulb, especially the rare striped and broken varieties, is worth a fortune. Some sell for hundreds of guilders, others for thousands. One particularly prized type, the Semper Augustus, is said to have sold for more than the cost of a canal house in the heart of Amsterdam. Entire estates change hands for a handful of bulbs, wrapped in paper and passed like treasure. And yet, these bulbs are not even blooming. Most of the time, they remain buried underground. The deals are written not for flowers, but for the promise of flowers. Buyers purchase rights to bulbs they've never seen, set to be harvested in the spring. Contracts are signed. Names exchanged. Wagers made. The market is not about gardens anymore. It is about speed, anticipation, risk. In taverns and town squares, men huddle together with ink-stained fingers, whispering prices, arguing over varieties, passing contracts from hand to hand. The language of botany becomes one of greed. The Viceroy, the Admiral Liefkens, the General Van Gogh, not just names of flowers now, but names of hope, or names of ruin. You meet a merchant who sold his business to invest in bulbs. He tells you over warm ale that he tripled his money in a week. Another man, once a baker, now speaks only of soil and sun, though he has never planted anything in his life. A widow invests her dowry in 3 rare bulbs, believing it will secure her daughter's future. A student sells his books and buys a contract instead. Everyone, it seems, has a stake. But beneath the laughter and the clinking of tankards, there's unease. Prices rise so fast that even experienced traders feel dizzy. No one wants to be left behind. Everyone is sure someone else will pay more. And so the game continues. At first, only the wealthy played. Merchants, nobles, doctors. But now, cobblers and milkmaids and chimney sweeps enter the market. They pawn belongings. They borrow. They join collective pools. The frenzy spreads beyond Amsterdam to Haarlem, Leiden, Alkmaar. Market halls fill with crowds. A single whisper can spark a wave of buying or selling. And then, without warning, something shifts. It begins quietly. One auction fails to attract a buyer. A second ends with a price lower than expected. A rumor spreads. Someone backed out of a deal. A tulip contract is torn up in public. Laughter turns nervous. Some try to sell quickly, but buyers hesitate. Panic whispers through the streets like a cold wind before a storm. Within days, the bottom falls out. Prices collapse. Contracts become worthless. Men who were rich in bulbs are now rich in paper promises no one will honor. Fortunes vanish. Disputes flood the courts. Friends stop speaking. Taverns empty. A man stands in the street with a sack of tulips he cannot give away. A woman weeps outside a notary's office, holding a contract that once promised a dowry. It is now no more valuable than ash. In Haarlem, one trader takes his own life. Another is arrested after attacking a neighbor he believes cheated him. In the churches, ministers preach of vanity and punishment. In the streets, children kick discarded bulbs into the gutters. What once inspired awe is now a joke, a caution, a fall from grace, and yet the world does not end. Ships still sail. Markets recover. Spring arrives, and tulips bloom again. Their petals unfold silently, unaware of the madness they once caused. In gardens they are planted again, admired once more as flowers, not fortunes. In the years that follow, pamphlets will be written mocking the frenzy. One shows a monkey in a merchant's hat, holding a tulip like a king's scepter. Others depict beggars holding bulbs with pleading eyes, but not everyone laughs. Some lost everything. Others never quite recovered. The government investigates, then does little. No one is prosecuted, no reforms made. The economy absorbs the blow. The elite distance themselves from the scandal. The poor nurse their bitterness quietly. And in Amsterdam, the houses once traded for bulbs remain standing. Their windows looking out over canals that do not care what they reflect. And in Amsterdam, the houses once traded for bulbs remain standing, their windows looking out over canals that do not care what they reflect. They have seen gold-laden ships sail in, and they have watched morning barges pass beneath them. The collapse of the tulip trade, as strange as it was, became just another ripple in the surface of a city always in motion. But for those who lived through it, the collapse did not feel like a ripple. It felt like a crack in the floorboards of reality. One day your neighbors toasted your success. The next, they turned away in silence. The baker who once offered you extra loaves now avoids your eye. The notary who once praised your boldness now speaks of prudence and restraint, as if he had never shared in the same wine-soaked evenings of speculation. The same people who once cheered you on now pretend they had always known better. Some people lose more than money. They lose homes, reputations, the fragile sense of certainty that had held their lives together. A man who once hosted tulip viewing parties in his garden now sells kindling in the market square, silent as passers-by lower their gaze. One woman, who had traded her husband's inheritance for a bulb that never flowered, now lives with her sister and sweeps floors in a church. Others retreat inward. They stop speaking of the mania at all. The paintings of tulips are moved to the back walls or taken down completely. The contracts, once framed with pride, are quietly burned. In journals, if written at all, the dates of the crash are marked with vague lines. Nothing more than troubles began, or the market shifted. Pride and shame share a wall too thin to separate, and yet the tulips themselves remain innocent. In spring, they return to the gardens. Their petals unfold with the same quiet grace, untouched by the madness that once surrounded them. The Semper Augustus still draws gasps from those who see it. The broken colors, once prized for their rarity, are now known to be caused by a virus, a flaw that made beauty, a weakness mistaken for perfection. Nature, in its indifference, becomes a mirror. Historians later debate whether tulip mania truly was a full-scale economic collapse. Some argue it was confined to a narrow class, a brief and localized bubble. Others say it reflected something deeper, a need to believe that value could come from wonder alone. A dream that beauty could be owned, traded, multiplied like coin. And that dream, like all others, had its cost. The Dutch government did investigate, but no sweeping reform followed. The contracts, based on futures and trust, were not technically illegal. Most participants refused to press charges, too ashamed or too implicated to demand redress. The economy continued. Trade thrived. The VOC sent more ships east. The guild halls remained full. But in coffee houses and drawing rooms, a new caution took root. A quiet voice at the back of every mind now asked, and what if it falls? The cultural impact lingered far longer. Plays and poems were written satirizing the craze. In Leiden, a student staged a parody market, trading painted rocks in place of bulbs. In Haarlem, a choir sang verses lamenting the downfall of a man who gave up everything for a flower that never bloomed. The theme appeared again and again: beauty, folly, loss. It became part of the Dutch character, a lesson wrapped in petals. And in the art, too, the tulip changed. Once painted in bold glory, it now appeared more carefully, more quietly. Artists began to place it beside skulls, hourglasses, and extinguished candles, symbols of time, of mortality, of the fragile line between joy and ruin. The tulip became not just an object of desire, but a metaphor. In homes that had once hosted traders and collectors, the gardens returned to simplicity. Lavender, lettuce, herbs for cooking. The elaborate greenhouses fell quiet. Some were dismantled entirely. Others became sheds for tools, their glass panes now clouded with dust and age. The fever had passed, but some never stopped loving the flower itself. A retired merchant named Peter Van Noort, who had once wagered half his wealth on striped bulbs, now tended a small garden outside Haarlem. He no longer sold or bought. He no longer read the market papers, but each morning he walked through his rows of tulips. He spoke to them softly, naming each one. He did not blame them. He blamed only himself. Nearby, a former clerk from the Amsterdam exchange kept a single bulb in a wooden box. He never planted it. He never opened the box. But each year, on the same date, he polished its lid and lit a single candle beside it. When asked why, he only said, to remember the bloom that never came. In time, the memory of the mania dulled. It became a curiosity, a story to tell on winter nights, a footnote in lectures on trade and markets. But if you listen carefully, beneath the laughter and disbelief, there is something more, a kind of sorrow. A sense that the tulip had offered something fragile and beautiful, and that the greed of men had turned it into something else entirely. And still the flowers bloom. In cities across the Netherlands, in modest gardens and public parks, tulips rise again each spring, their petals open to the sky without fear. They do not know what we once did in their name. They do not need to. They are what they have always been: brief, brilliant, and free. Chapter 7. Smuggling spices in the East Indies. The air is not like Amsterdam. It clings to your skin. It smells of salt and smoke and something else. Something sweet and earthy that you cannot quite name, until you see it with your own eyes. Nutmeg, clove, cinnamon. Their scent rides the warm winds of the East Indies. Drifting across volcanic ridges and jungle-fringed shores, you are thousands of miles from home now, and yet, for the Dutch, this is where wealth is born. You have arrived in the Maluku Islands, also called the Spice Islands. Green hills rise steeply from the sea. Coconut palms sway over sleepy harbors. Wooden boats dot the coastline, their sails patched and faded. It looks peaceful from the distance, but peace here is a fragile illusion. The Dutch do not just trade spices. They guard them like treasure, protect them like secrets, and pursue them like prey. The islands are small, but their soil is rich. Here, a single tree can produce fruit worth its weight in silver. The Dutch East India Company knows this well. That is why they have built forts on the coasts, why they patrol the waters with armed vessels, why they have chased out Portuguese and English rivals with brutal precision. They have planted flags on every hill and trees in every village. But treaties are paper, and the spice still grows. You step onto the island of Bandeira under the wary eyes of VOC soldiers. They wear wool uniforms ill-suited for the tropical heat, their muskets slung casually but never far from hand. The fort behind them rises above the port like a stone fist. Inside, clerks tally shipments, magistrates issue orders, and officers keep a tight schedule. Every ounce of spice must be accounted for. Every shipment weighed and sealed. And yet, the company leaks. In the market stalls, behind woven baskets of fruit and bolts of fabric, another world operates in whispers. Smuggling is forbidden, but it thrives. A single nutmeg seed carried out in a sailor's boot can start a plantation in another colony. And the company knows it. That's why search crews inspect every outgoing ship, why merchants are watched, why informants are paid in quiet coins. But no system is perfect. You meet a local man selling smoked fish and tamarind. His stall is unremarkable, his smile polite. But when the guards are distracted, he leans close and opens a pouch of crushed clove hidden in rice. He says nothing. He doesn't need to. He looks you in the eye, and the price is in the silence. It is not greed that drives him, but necessity. His brother was in prison last year for refusing to surrender his harvest. His cousin vanished after selling nutmeg to a Portuguese trader. The spice does not just season food. It stains lives. The Dutch monopoly is strict. Farmers are required to sell only to VOC agents at fixed prices that keep them poor. Any attempt to grow outside the approved plantations is met with burning fields, arrests, or worse. In the early 1600s, when the Bandanese refused to submit, the company sent soldiers. What followed was not negotiation. It was slaughter. Villages were razed. Survivors enslaved? The message was clear. The spices belonged to the company. Even now, decades later, the memory lingers. Some of the older villagers still carry the scars. Others pass stories in song, in lullabies that sound soft but carry warnings. Foreigners bring coin, but also chains. They bring roads, but also gallows. Children are told to be careful what they say near strangers. The forest has ears, and sometimes, so do ships. Among the Dutch sailors, smuggling is both feared and fantasized. A single pouch of nutmeg sold in secret could fund a year's wages. Some take the risk. They hide seeds in hollowed-out books, in the hems of jackets, in the barrels of gunpowder where no one dares to reach. A few succeed. Most do not. Punishment is swift. Public. A sailor caught last week was whipped at dawn and had his wages stripped. Another was hanged for treason when caught trading cloves to a Chinese junk. The VOC calls it protecting trade. Others call it empire. Even within the company ranks, distrust brews. Not every official is honest. Some turn blind eyes in exchange for bribes. A few run smuggling rings of their own, careful not to be caught by the same rules they enforce. It is a delicate dance. One step too bold, and a man vanishes. No trial, no record. Just a quiet mention in a ship's log transferred, or lost at sea. The spice itself becomes something more than food. It becomes obsession. In Amsterdam, clove-studded oranges hang in the homes of the rich, perfuming the air in winter. Nutmeg is shaved into brandy and sprinkled on pies. Cinnamon is blended into remedies, perfumes, even ink. These small aromatic fragments of the East become tokens of status, of taste, of power. But few there know what was paid to bring them home. Back on the islands, the harvest continues. Workers scale trees barefoot, their fingers stained with resin. Children gather fallen fruit in baskets. Women dry seeds in the sun on wide-woven mats. The scent is intoxicating, thick and warm, clinging to your clothes for days. But the beauty of it hides the pressure. They are watched constantly. Their yield measured. Their loyalty tested. You visit a plantation managed by the VOC. It is tidy, efficient, but silent. Workers do not speak freely. Overseers move through the groves with pistols at their belts. At night, you hear the sounds of drums in the distance, soft and rhythmic, like heartbeats buried in the jungle. Music forbidden by the company, but played anyway. A quiet rebellion. A reminder that culture, like spice, cannot be entirely controlled. Ships continue to come and go, loading crates wrapped in waxed cloth and marked with seals. Each one is inspected by officials, their eyes searching for betrayal. And yet, still some seeds escape. Still, somewhere, someone will risk it all for one handful of fragrant dust. Because here, in the thick heat of the Indies, the air may smell of paradise, but the ground is sown with fear. Because here, in the thick heat of the Indies, the air may smell of paradise, but the ground is sown with fear. And yet, even under that weight, life finds a way to move forward. At dawn, fishermen push narrow canoes into the surf, their nets heavy with hope. In villages tucked behind rows of banana trees, families gather for quiet meals, sharing what little they have, always watching the horizon for sails that may bring trouble. Smuggling continues not just because of greed, but because the rules were never fair. The Dutch East India Company demanded control over the land, the trees, even the seeds themselves. But no one ever truly controls nature. Birds carry seeds farther than borders. Wind spreads pollen across forbidden ground. And people quietly keep traditions alive. In some corners of the island, tiny gardens are hidden among rocks or deep within groves. There, elders plant clove trees not registered with the company. These are tended in silence, watered at night, protected by generations who remember the violence of the past. No contracts bind these trees. No taxes are paid. Their existence is a quiet act of defiance, a whisper of ownership in a world that has taken so much. Even some Dutch settlers, those far from the eyes of Batavia or Amsterdam, begin to question the system. A few marry into local families. They hear the songs. They learn the stories. They see the cost of every shipment, the lives bent and broken for a pouch of dried bark. Some turn their backs on the company, disappearing into the interior, never to return. Most do not. But the doubts linger. Even empire, when seen up close, begins to show its cracks. One young clerk stationed in Ternate writes home to his sister, describing the scent of spice markets, the bright fabrics worn by local women, and the way the sky burns pink at dusk. But he also writes of loneliness, of the silence in the fort, of the look in a trader's eye when told the price of his own harvest. He wonders if it's worth it, all this distance and discipline for a company that knows his name only on paper. He doesn't receive a reply. By late evening, the docks glow with oil lamps, their light reflected in the dark water. Boats bob quietly, guards pace slowly, and from the edge of the jungle, distant drums still play. You stand beside a cargo manifest, watching crates sealed and stamped. There is no trace of the hands that picked the spices or the pain they endured. Only numbers. Only destinations. London, Amsterdam, Cape Town. These names drift over the sea like promises, as if what happens here will vanish once it is out of sight. But it never truly vanishes. In one infamous case, a Dutch merchant secretly sells clove seeds to the French. He is careful, disguising them as bundles of cloth and pays bribes to secure passage. The seeds arrive in Mauritius, then spread to Reunion, then further into French colonies. The monopoly is broken not with cannons, but with roots, with time, with quiet defiance. By the end of the 18th century, Dutch control over the spice trade begins to fade, undone not by war, but by what they could not contain. And so, even as the company boasts of profits and expansion, even as new forts rise and more ships are sent from Amsterdam, the seeds of collapse are already planted. The system relied on total control, and total control was never possible. Still, the company does not change its ways. The rules remain strict. The punishments remain harsh. Every theft, every whisper of smuggling is met with force. But it becomes harder to hide the truth. Markets in Europe begin to notice the influx of non-Dutch spices. Questions arise. Rumors spread. Other empires take note. The company's grip loosens. finger by finger. The people of the Spice Islands, however, do not celebrate. They have learned not to trust too easily. One colonizer may fall, but another will follow. Ships change flags. Languages shift. But the struggle remains. Still, the trees grow. Still, the forests breathe. A Dutch officer retires and stays behind on Banda. He no longer wears his uniform. He has built a small house near the edge of the village, and he tends a garden of nutmeg trees. The locals watch him carefully, not sure what to make of him. He teaches the children to read, carves wooden toys, and leaves offerings at the base of old trees, copying the rituals he once banned. He never speaks of his former rank. When asked why he stayed, he simply says, "Because here the world smells like something real." And indeed, it does. The scent of the Indies is not just exotic. It is layered with memory. Smoke from cooking fires, rain on stone, crushed clove and calloused palms. These things are not captured in ledgers or company reports. They are carried in breath, in rhythm, in the slow steps of people who have lived with both beauty and grief. Back in the Netherlands, spice arrives in neat jars with printed labels. It is stirred into sauces, sprinkled on sweets, added to ink for royal documents. The housewives who use it will never see the faces behind it. The poets who praise it will never smell the soil it came from. To them, it is a luxury, a delight. But for those in the Indies, it was labor, it was loss, and it was resistance. Even today, in the Banda Islands, trees grow where plantations once stood. Children climb their trunks, unaware of the blood once spilled to keep them exclusive. Elders tell stories. Tourists arrive with cameras. The air still smells of nutmeg. But now it smells freer because no monopoly lasts forever. Not even the Dutch East India Company. Not even here. Chapter 8. Banquets in a Dutch Merchant Guild Hall. The city is lit with amber light as dusk settles over Amsterdam. The canals reflect lanterns hung from iron brackets. The air carries the scent of roasting meat, warm bread, and the faint tang of damp stone. Church bells mark the hour, echoing off rooftops. But above the street noise, in a grand building of brick and carved sandstone, another world prepares for its evening ritual. You step through tall double doors into a merchant guild hall. The ceiling is high and timber-bird, beams dark with age. Men whose hands do not bear the calluses of sailors, but whose signatures command fleets. Beneath the laughter and Latin quotations, there are murmurs of news from the East. Their eyes follow the feast silently, as if watching their legacy unfold in each slice of roast and each ledger balanced. The portraits do not smile. They judge. A lost shipment of clothes. A failed negotiation in Ceylon. A pirate attack off the Malabar coast. One man leans in and whispers of a governor recalled for misconduct. None of them know what happens inside the guild hall, but they feel its weight. The prices decided here will ripple outward. The shipments arranged will chart maps. Voices low. The word Java is spoken, then disease, then losses. They part without shaking hands. No one else seems to notice. Or perhaps they choose not to. A musician enters with a lute and begins to play softly in the corner, celebration laced with calculation. Nothing is without consequence, even the choice of wine. And in this room, memory is its own currency. The merchant who selects it subtly signals the trade route he favors. The seating arrangement reflects alliances. The man placed nearest the window is being tested offered visibility, but also vulnerability, and everyone knows it. The melody is simple, almost childlike. One of the merchants hums along, eyes closed. Another begins to recite a poem about the sea, half serious, half mocking. Laughter rises. A servant brings out a dish of candied oranges dusted in cinnamon. For a moment, the mood lightens. The world outside fades. The men who toast each other tonight will send others across oceans, into jungles, into war. Another mentions a rising price of silver in Japan. These aren't rumors, they're signals. The gears of trade turn not only with coin, but with knowledge passed carefully across candlelit tables. They wear stiff collars and doublets of black or dark green, their beards trimmed, their rings heavy. They speak in measured tones. Their voices carry easily, shaped by years of negotiation. These not the rowdy traders of the docks. His clothes are fine, but his face betrays nerves. This is his first banquet. He laughs too quickly. Drinks a little too much. He nods at everything the senior men say, trying to show he belongs. His father was a shipbuilder. He inherited his position, not earned it. And tonight he learns how power is truly passed, not in courtrooms, but in rooms like this, over food and firelight. They are directors, governors, bankers. And tonight they feast. Oil lamps flicker from wrought iron chandeliers. Tapestries line the walls, scenes of ships at sea, gods of trade and fortune, and allegorical figures holding scales and compasses. Beneath them, long oak tables gleam with polish, set with pewter plates, glass goblets, and carved silver knives. The room smells of wax and wine, meat and citrus, smoke and velvet. This is where the powerful gather. Not soldiers or nobles, but merchants. The food arrives in procession. Platters of roast goose, venison with clove, trout glazed in butter and wine. Loaves of bread still warm, wheels of cheese veined with mold. He raises a goblet and nods toward the portrait that hangs behind him. A painting of himself, younger, in a similar pose. The other men chuckle politely. Toasts are made to the company, to trade, to another profitable quarter. Glasses are raised, wine sipped, conversations resumed. Exotic fruits, pineapples, tamarinds, oranges, sliced and arranged like sculpture. Servants move silently between the tables, trained to anticipate need before it's spoken. They refill goblets, clear bones, adjust napkins. Their presence is constant, their names forgotten. At the head of the hall sits the guildmaster, his chair taller than the rest, carved with the city's crest. But listen closely. Paintings gaze down from the walls past guildmasters, benefactors, founding fathers of trade. You glance across the room and notice a young merchant at the edge of the table. Outside, the city continues as always. The poor crowd taverns. Sailors stumble home. Orphans huddle near bridges. And yet, to them, this is only supper. The wine flows more freely now. But even here, shadows gather. A man steps away from the table to speak privately with a company agent. The two lean close. This is the nature of the guild hall, opulence built on precision. Still, the evening continues. No one breaks form. To do so would be remembered. Still, the evening continues. No one breaks form. To do so would be remembered. And in this room, memory is its own currency. Plates are cleared. A final toast is raised, this time to the House of Orange, to the Republic itself. It is not optional. Each man lifts his glass, some with enthusiasm, others with well-practiced neutrality. To refuse would be to invite questions. And no one here wants questions. He studies the men with quiet interest, noting who laughs with whom, who leaves early, who is called aside for a final word. He knows that his future depends on these observations. He is not yet part of the inner circle. The others lean in. They read the figures together, shipment tallies, projected revenues, casualty reports. One shipment of nutmeg arrived short. One by one, the merchants retrieve their cloaks, adjust their hats, and take their leave. Outside, their carriages wait. Horses snort and stamp, their breath visible in the cold. Servants hold lanterns and open doors. A few men walk home. She has done this 100 times. She knows where the drops of wine will be, which napkins were folded hastily, which seat always leaves crumbs. She hums to herself as she works. It is not a Dutch tune. It is older, softer. She does not expect anyone to hear it. They prefer the air. But the men who sit inside it move invisible levers that stretch across oceans. They are not kings, they have no crowns, but they rule nonetheless. Prefer to feel the city under their boots, the quiet crunch of snow reminding them that, for all their wealth, they are still part of this place. The merchants will return again next week or the one after. They will eat, drink, and decide what ships will sail, what ports will close, what nations will bend. Another was seized by English privateers. The letter says little of the men who died, only the value of what was lost. After a pause, the merchant folds the letter and tucks it back into his case. He says nothing, but his face shifts slightly. The others read it, then turned back to the fire. He records it in a ledger. Flour, sugar, meat bones, 2 bottles of wine untouched. He sighs and rubs his fingers across the page to smear the ink just slightly. No one will check it too closely. A little extra food means a little extra coin, and everyone has their own kind of trade. But you will be if he watches closely and speaks only when invited. For now, he waits. He listens. He learns. The room smells now of ash and citrus, of melted wax and distant perfume. The long tables are empty. Only crumbs remain. But the room is not silent. It holds the echoes of conversations, the weight of choices made, the trace of alliances newly forged or quietly broken. Dessert is served on fine Delft porcelain. Spice cakes with almond paste, glazed apples with cloves. A small bowl of cream whipped with rose water. The flavors are rich, meant to linger, but most eat slowly now, sated and thoughtful. They speak in smaller groups now, voices lower, hands resting on bellies. Ashes are swept from the fireplace. A log is added, not for heat, but for comfort. One guest, older than the rest, begins to nod off in his chair. His friends smile quietly and let him be. He has earned the right to sleep where he chooses. One man shares news of a new canal project. Another wonders whether English merchants will honor the latest treaty. Across the room, a debate starts over whether gold or pepper is the better long-term investment. No one mentions the sailors who won't survive the trip to fetch either. The night has reached that soft, quieter hour when even the powerful grow reflective. A few rise from their chairs and gather near the hearth. The servants begin to dim the lamps. Not all at once, but gradually, so the light fades gently, like the evening itself. The city's rooftops soften under white. Lanterns glow more gently now, their reflections blurred in the canal. Somewhere nearby, a church bell tolls. It's late, but not too late for decisions to be made. A junior accountant lingers at the far end of the hall. Outside the guild hall, snow begins to fall. Inside, one merchant opens a small case. Within it is a letter, freshly arrived from Batavia. The party breaks slowly. Back in the hall, the last of the candles flicker low. A maid enters to begin the cleaning. She moves quickly, practiced in her work. Later, in the back storeroom, a cook tallies what's left from the feast. By morning, the hall will look untouched. The floors scrubbed, the silver polished, the fires relit, and the city will continue around them, indifferent. For all its grandeur, the guild hall is just a room. They rule through appetite, through silence, through gold, and while the world outside changes, while snow melts, while uprisings rise and fall, while fortunes are made and unmade, the banquets continue. Because Empire, too, wears a napkin and holds a goblet. Chapter 9. Frost fairs and canals in winter Amsterdam. The city has changed. A cold stillness has settled over the rooftops of Amsterdam. Chimneys send up ribbons of smoke into the gray sky, and every footstep on the cobblestones rings with sharper clarity. The canals, which once flowed with the color of mud and merchant waste, have frozen solid, not just at the edges, but from bank to bank. And with that, a transformation begins. The ice is thick enough to hold a world. You step onto it carefully at first, boots skimming across packed snow that crunches beneath you. The wind bites your face, your breath fogs the air, but around you there is laughter, music, movement. The canal has become a street, a plaza, a market, a celebration. What was once used for travel and trade now serves as stage and playground. The Frost Fair has arrived. Stalls are built atop the ice wooden boards laid over barrels, canvas tents anchored in snow. Merchants sell spiced wine, roasted chestnuts, ribbons, trinkets, and cheap paintings of skating scenes not unlike the one you stand in now. Children dart between the legs of vendors, bundled in wool and fur, cheeks pink from the cold. Couples skate hand in hand, their scarves fluttering behind them like flags. There are jugglers, singers, a man playing a small organ wheeled out over the ice on a cart. The frozen canal becomes a mirror, holding up the city's joy, its noise, its heart. But look closer and the joy is not shared equally. At one end of the canal, the crowd is thickest. That's where the better stalls are. The richer merchants, the finer food. You smell cinnamon, cloves, and butter melting on hot iron griddles. You see children with marzipan animals and women in silk-lined cloaks. At the far end, closer to the bridge, things are different. The stalls are fewer, the goods simpler. A thin man sells boiled roots from a tin pot. A woman hawks knitted mittens too rough to fetch much coin. A beggar crouches beside a post, holding out his hat, steam rising from his mouth as he pleads in a voice already hoarse. The ice is even thinner here. Literally, it creaks when stepped on. The city maintains this part last, if at all. Near the center of a stage has been erected. A small troupe performs a comedic play, their voices cracking in the cold. They act out a story of a foolish French nobleman falling through the ice. The crowd laughs, not because it's clever, but because it feels good to laugh when your fingers are stiff and your worries cannot be fixed tonight. Laughter, here, is both currency and escape. You walk farther down the canal and find a scribe writing poems for coins. He sits on a folding stool, ink nearly frozen in its pot, scratching words onto scraps of parchment with gloved hands. For a few coins, he will write you a verse, a love poem, a prayer, a complaint to God. The city, he says, is full of stories in winter, more honest ones than in summer. Cold, he says, reveals what heat conceals. Not far away, skaters gather in a circle. They take turns gliding into the center, spinning or racing or stumbling with laughter. A group of young men argue over whose boots are faster. One challenges the other to a race from the bridge to the mill and back. Wagers are made, bread, gloves, a small bottle of cherry cordial. The race begins. Cheers rise. And for a moment, the city forgets everything else. But the Frost Fair is not just for celebration. It is also a necessity. In years of deep freeze, barges cannot pass, trade slows. Goods must be carried by sled or cart. Poor families gather wood from the edges of the fair, hoping to heat their homes for one more night. Vendors sell whatever they can. Some find fortune in the crowds. Others return home with empty pockets and fingers too numb to count what little remains. This is not the first Frost Fair, nor will it be the last. The Little Ice Age, as some will later call it, has changed the rhythm of Dutch winters. Canals freeze solid more often, cities adapt, and the people, always clever, always resourceful, find ways to make something out of the freeze, not just survival, but something closer to celebration. Still, there are dangers. Every year the ice breaks somewhere. It is a rule of the season. Usually, it happens at the edges, where too many feet gather, or beneath a cart too heavy with goods. When it happens, there's a sound like thunder muffled in snow. Then the rush of water, the scramble of boots, a scream, and always silence after. A boy once fell through not far from here. His name was Peter. He had been selling candied nuts for his mother, carrying the tin box tied to his waist with string. When the ice broke, he fell quickly, the weight dragging him down. They pulled him out, but it was too late. The city mourned briefly. A sermon was preached. Then the fair continued. The following week, someone else used the same stall. No memorial was built, only memory. No memorial was built, only memory. And like the frost, memory lingers only as long as the cold holds. Once the thaw comes, the city forgets. The hole in the ice refreezes, the box of candied nuts is sold by another child, and the sermon becomes just another line in a worn book of Sunday lessons. The wind has picked up slightly, carrying with it the faint strains of a street violin. The music is uneven, but honest. The bow moves with care. They will appear in etchings and paintings that will decorate parlors and salons far from here. The images will show smiling faces, bustling stalls, and bright ribbons fluttering in the snow. They shout and tumble, their joy unbothered by the cold. For them, winter is freedom. No chores, no school, just endless white and open space. One boy wears no gloves. His hands are raw. He doesn't care. He scores a goal and lifts his arms in triumph, eyes bright, cheeks flushed. In this moment, there is nothing else. No war, no trade, no empire. It is water, reading. It holds for now, but it remembers warmth. It remembers movement. The last guests huddle near it, steam rising from their coats. Not just snow and silence, but the layering of stories, some joyful, some grim, all softened by the frost. The canal will flow again. The vendors will return to their shops. The painter will sell his canvas to a wealthy collector. But for a moment, for just a few brittle weeks, the world froze. And in that stillness, people found something rare. A man recites a story about the great frost of 29 when the canals froze solid for 60 days. Another insisted a 63. A third says he was there, and that horses danced on the Amstel without sinking. No one knows the truth, but no one minds. The story warms them more than the fire. Soon, it will begin to crack, to soften. The fair will vanish. The stalls will be dismantled. The laughter will return to memory, and the city will move on, as it always does. Only the game, the wind, and the laughter that trails behind him like smoke. But they will leave out the rest. The cold that seeps into bones, the cracked lips, they do not see the fair. They see only each other. The vendors pack up slowly. Coins are counted. Leftovers wrapped. A few stay behind, hoping for one last sale. Others linger simply because they have nowhere else to go. A man sits with a cup of frozen ale, staring at nothing. He is not drunk. He is not awake, he is simply cold. A private story, playing out beneath a public sky. The ice is scarred now, pitted with grooves and footprints. It will snow again overnight, and by morning it will appear untouched. But the traces remain beneath the powder. If you know how to look, you can still see the paths taken. The places where feet gathered, the points where people danced or fell or vanished. They walk away in different directions. The moment passes. The world doesn't stop. It never does. The bare feet wrapped in rags. The fires lit not for comfort, but survival. The tune is a waltz, one meant for warmer months, but it takes on new meaning when played against the cold. She's taken ill. He offers her no medicine, only warmth, only prayer. The merchant stands nearby, his face still and unreadable. His stall will remain open. Trade does not wait for healing. There are orders to fill, coins to earn, appearances to keep. Later, he will walk home alone, the crunch of his boots louder than before. But for a time in these weeks of ice, people remember. He sits on a stool with his canvas perched on a narrow easel, his fingers red from exposure. His brush moves slowly, capturing a woman in a red shawl, skating alone. She glides, arms out, coat swirling behind her like a banner. The painter doesn't speak. He barely breathes. He is trying to catch something more than her likeness. Something about the way her scarf lifts in the breeze. Something fleeting. Not just him, but others too. The ones who never returned. The ones who slipped beneath the surface and vanished into the black water below. You walk further along the canal, the sky now darkening to indigo. Oil lamps cast golden halos across the white snow. Near a stone bridge, you see a painter at work. These scenes become part of what people will later call the Dutch winter. Further down the canal, a priest gives a quiet blessing to a merchant's wife. Back on the ice, a group of boys plays a rough game with sticks and a carved wooden puck. You notice a couple arguing near a frozen boat. Their voices are low but sharp. He gestures. She folds her arms. As midnight approaches, the fair begins to thin. The wealthier guests retire first. Their carriages rattling down narrow streets toward townhouses warmed by fireplaces and fur-lined beds. The skaters leave too, their laughter fading into silence. Finally, the canal grows quiet. Only the groan of ice remains. It shifts beneath your feet, reminding you that it is not stone. In a tavern nearby, a fire crackles. This is winter in Amsterdam, not comfort, not certainty, but closeness. Chapter 10. The Siege of Dutch Salon. The heat is the first thing you notice. It hangs in the air like a wet cloth draped over your shoulders, heavy and constant. Your uniform, stiff with salt from the voyage, clings to your skin. Mosquitoes drift lazily through the air, their buzz low and unbothered. You are in Salon now, far from the cobbled streets of Amsterdam or the frozen canals of Delft. Here, nothing is still, not the jungle, not the politics, not the war. You arrived 2 weeks ago aboard a Dutch East India Company frigate. The harbor was narrow, cluttered with small native vessels, some no bigger than fishing boats, others sleek and painted with unfamiliar symbols. Palm trees fringed the shoreline. Smoke rose from distant fires. And just beyond the hills, inland and hidden, was the reason you came. A Portuguese fortress. A stronghold dug into the land, holding a town, a market, and the keys to the cinnamon trade. The Dutch want it. Ceylon is not new to war. The Portuguese arrived a century before you, building forts and converting locals to Catholicism by sword or sermon. Now the Dutch East India Company, allied with local kingdoms who chafe under Portuguese rule, has sent soldiers, guns, and coin. You, one of them, march inland behind a line of ox carts and sweating artillerymen, your musket slung over your back, your boots already splitting at the seams. The jungle closes in quickly, paths narrow into trails. Leeches crawl up from the undergrowth. Trees tower over you, tangled with vines and thick with birdsong. And, yeah, there's little joy in the scenery. The men are quiet. Some are sick already, their hands shaking from fever. Others walk with heads low, their minds far from the mission. Marching through jungle is not glorious. It is slow, wet, and exhausting. At night, you sleep in tents or under makeshift lean-tos. The jungle hums with noise, crickets, frogs, something larger that never shows itself. The camp smells of sweat, rotting canvas, and boiled rice. The officers stay apart, their tents larger, guarded and shaded by fabric screens. Orders come down through whispers and handwritten notes. You are to reach the fortress in 5 days. It takes 11. When you arrive, you do not see the enemy at first. The Portuguese are inside the walls, watching. Their flag still flies above the stone ramparts. You can just make out the muzzles of their cannon, dark circles aimed toward the trees. There's no battle yet, only waiting. The siege begins slowly. Trenches are dug, cannon are positioned. Messages are sent across lines under flags of truce. Demands for surrender, warnings of starvation, promises of mercy that no one believes. The sun beats down mercilessly. The earth is dry, cracked. The men dig anyway. Digging gives them something to do. Soon the shooting starts. Muskets fire from the walls. Cannon roar and echo off the hills. The Dutch return fire in volleys, smoke clouding the treetops. There are casualties, but not yet many. The real damage is done by disease. Fever spreads through the Dutch camp. Men shiver at night and collapse during the day. The surgeon works constantly, cutting, wrapping, praying. There are no miracles, only survival. You begin to notice the changes in yourself. You speak less. You eat quickly. You tie your belongings tighter. You no longer flinch at gunfire. You have seen men die, not in the frenzy of battle, but quietly, in the mud, their lips pale, their hands cold. The jungle does not mourn. And then the order comes, an assault at dawn. The plan is simple. A frontal push while cannon bombard the gate. The locals allied with the Dutch Candian warriors dressed in red and armed with long knives will strike from the opposite side. It is bold or desperate. The line is thin. The morning of the assault is strangely quiet. Fog hangs low. The birds fall silent. The men stand in lines, muskets primed, eyes forward. An officer paces slowly, muttering the Lord's Prayer under his breath. Someone drops a powder horn. No one laughs. The signal is given. The cannon fire first. The noise is deafening. The ground shakes. Then the shouting begins. The Dutch charge forward, muskets raised. Shots crack through the air. Some men fall immediately. Others trip over roots or stumble in the mud. You keep moving, not from bravery, but because stopping means being trampled. When you reach the wall, the air is thick with smoke and ash. Ladders are pushed upward. Some fall before they touch stone. Arrows fly from above. Someone screams. You see a man beside you catch a shot to the shoulder, his body spinning backwards. Another climbs past him, shouting something in Portuguese. For a moment, it is chaos. And then, a moment of silence, one of the gates gives way. A breach. The Candians swarm in, their war cries rising like thunder. The Portuguese fire one last desperate volley, then fall back. The fort's taken not by strategy, but by exhaustion. Inside the walls, the smell of blood mingles with gunpowder. Some of the Portuguese surrender. Others flee into the hills. The civilians, women, children, old men hide in cellars and behind barrels. The Dutch officers step forward to restore order, barking in Dutch and broken Sinhala. The massacre does not come. Not today. The orders are strict. Take the fort. Protect the cargo. Control the port. And then report the cost. And then report the cost. That is always the final task. Not the mourning, not the rebuilding, but bay counting. A clerk arrives within a day, fresh-faced and pale from the coast, carrying a ledger bound in red leather. He sets up beneath a scorched awning and begins to record the names of the wounded, the weight of the recovered cannon, the barrels of powder spent, the pounds of cinnamon secured. He does not ask for stories, only numbers. The fortress, now in Dutch hands, becomes an outpost. Flags are replaced. The Portuguese coats of arms are chipped off stone with chisels and hammers. New ones are nailed in their place, the paint not yet dry. The civilians are registered. A few are permitted to stay as laborers. The rest are shipped off in boats that disappeared down the coast. Where they go is not recorded. A week after the battle, you are ordered to help dismantle part of the old defenses. Brick by brick, the past is removed. You do it without thinking. Just work, lift, carry, stack. The officer who gave the order doesn't explain why it must be done. Perhaps to erase what came before. Perhaps to prevent it from rising again. Or maybe it's just cheaper to reuse the stone. The Candians, your allies in this campaign, are less present now. Their leader has returned inland, displeased with how the spoils were divided. He expected more land, weapons, gold. Instead, he received a ceremonial gift and a letter of gratitude written in a language he cannot read. Tension simmers. But the Dutch do not worry. They have the fort, they have the harbor, and for now, they have the cinnamon. You walk the perimeter of the fortress at sunset. The jungle glows orange. Monkeys swing from branch to branch. Birds cry out in sharp, echoing calls. Below, in the harbor, ships rest at anchor, their masts like black needles against the sky. Men load crates into the holds, each one marked with the company seal. They are filled not just with cinnamon, but with pepper, ivory, and silk. Cargo more valuable than lives. You hear that a new shipment will leave for Batavia by the end of the week. And from there, it will continue to Amsterdam. You think of the merchants in the Guildhall raising their goblets to another victory. They will toast the success of the mission. The profits gained, the stability restored. They will not hear about the fever that still lingers in the barracks. They will not smell the smoke still drifting from the burned storehouse. They will not know the names of the dead. Only the margin of return. Some nights you cannot sleep, not from guilt, but from the endless noise. The jungle never goes silent. The drums of insects, the rustling of trees, the distant beating of waves. It is beautiful, but it is not restful. You lie awake beneath your mosquito net and stare at the beams of the roof, counting them like a prayer, not for salvation, just for peace. In the town below, life resumes. The market reopens. Fishermen mend their nets. A boy sells pineapples from a basket woven by hand. A Portuguese woman offers to wash linen for the new garrison. She does not smile. She does not speak unless spoken to. But she shows up every day, her children trailing behind her like shadows. No one tells her to stop. Further inland, a small village sends word that it will not pay taxes to the company. A patrol is dispatched. You do not go with them, but you hear what happens. A misunderstanding, they say a few homes burned, a few men arrested, the rest dispersed. The company logbook records the event as pacification, the same word used for uprisings, raids, and riots. the same word used for anything that must be ended quickly. You begin to forget how long you've been here. The weeks blend into one another. You wake, you drill, you sweat, you wait. Sometimes when standing watch at night, you think of home. Not Amsterdam, but the smaller town you left behind. You remember the bells of your village church, the sound of frost crunching underfoot, the feel of wool gloves stiff with morning cold. Here, everything is soft, wet, alive, and it never stops moving. One day, you see a ship departing. A soldier you trained beside boards it. He has dysentery. He is being sent to Batavia to recover, though no one expects him to make the full journey. He nods at you from the deck. You nod back. He vanishes into the mist. Later that evening, you are ordered to paint the gate. The colors must match company regulations. The work is simple. You dip the brush in red, then black, then white. You paint over the cracks. You cover the weathered stone. It takes hours. No one watches. No one comments. But when it's done, you step back and see it gleam in the sunlight like something permanent. It won't last. The rain will wash it away in months. The jungle will reclaim the stones. The next war will shift the border. The company will rise, then fall. But for now it stands. History often favors the victors. But the land remembers everyone. And so does the heat. Chapter 11. Women behind windows life in the Dutch red light district. The street curves in a gentle arc, narrow and cobbled, wet with yesterday's rain. Oil lamps glow along the walls, their light soft and flickering, not quite enough to chase the dark from the corners. But it is real. More real, perhaps, than the polished parlors of the merchant elite. In these few alleys, life is stripped bare. Transactions are made not over spices or stocks, but over bodies. And behind each window stands a woman with her own quiet story. The windows here are tall, framed by red curtains. Some are open, others closed. Behind the glass, a different kind of Amsterdam breathes. This is not the part of the city the painters choose to capture. It will not appear in proud guild portraits or church altarpieces. She pays rent to the window's owner, who may or may not protect her. She bribes the constable once a month. She sends money to her sister in Haarlem. She drinks carefully, never too much. She trusts no one fully, not even the man who brings her bread each morning. And yet, she survives. That too is a kind of power. She sees you before you see her. Her eyes watch from behind the glass, measuring, reading, guessing. Her dress is simple but precise. Painted lips. Canal barges drift past, their lanterns glowing gold on the water. Church bells mark the hours. Dogs bark in distant courtyards. But here, time bends. Minutes stretch. Faces blur. Nights pass without distinction. Some clients are kind. Some are not. From waking up each day in a room no one can take from her, from choosing when to draw the curtain closed, some pay what they promise. Others vanish before dawn. The woman learns quickly how to read a man's shoes, his tone, the way he stands. These are not just details. They are warnings. Hair pinned back. A necklace that draws the eye to the neckline, not expensive, but carefully chosen, not in sadness, not in longing, just in silence. The city doesn't ask about her dreams. And she doesn't offer them. A small shop, maybe. A bakery. Or enough money to leave Amsterdam altogether, to disappear into the countryside and be no one. She imagines the smell of fresh grass. A window that opens to nothing but trees. A door that no one knocks on unless invited. Her job is not just to attract, but to invite. She knows that hope is heavier than most men realize. Not friendship, exactly. But recognition. They share glances, warnings. If someone is dangerous, the others know by the next evening. If someone disappears, candles are lit, quietly. No one says too much. Saying too much is a risk, but they remember. They always remember. It weighs down the body, slows the hands, softens the edge needed to keep moving. So she tucks it away. Behind the smile, behind the curtain, perhaps a painting on the wall, faded at the edges. The air is scented, not with perfume, but with lavender water meant to disguise the truth. The walls are thin. Voices carry. But most of the time, no one listens. That's part of the price. Discretion. You can hear the sermons sometimes muffled but present. The priests speak of virtue, of repentance, of salvation. But they do not walk these streets. They do not look into the windows. And when a woman seeks confession, she does so under another name to give the illusion of safety, of warmth, of control. She is not alone. Dozens of other windows line the street, each one with its own woman, its own lamp, its own unspoken arrangement. The red curtain is not a decoration. It is a signal. Others followed the lover who disappeared as soon as they arrived. A few were born into it, the daughters of women who worked the same street. There's no single story here, only threads. Tangled, frayed, sometimes cut short. It tells the world, this place is business, not sin. This body is a commodity, not a crime. And yet, everyone pretends not to look. Men pass by with their collars high. Wives glance away. The church bells toll all the same. Step inside one of the rooms and you'll find no mystery. A single bed, a wash basin, a small table. The woman behind the glass might be from Amsterdam, or she might not. Many are not. Some came from villages, promised work in the city. She keeps her earnings hidden in the floorboards, wrapped in cloth. Outside, the city pulses. Sometimes, after the last customer leaves, she sits on the edge of the bed and stares at the wall. But she has them. She will not say this out loud. She knows how the world works. Among the women, there is a kind of code. The church is not far from here, just 2 streets over. Still, she believes. Not in forgiveness, but in justice of a kind. Justice that comes not from the courts, but from survival. She chooses when to draw the curtain closed. And when she does, the world outside fades. The lamp is doused. The city keeps moving, but she claims the darkness for herself. In the silence of the room, she unties her bodice with steady fingers. The layers come off carefully, folded and hung. Every item has a place. When she stirs, it is not with dread, it is with calculation. Another day, another set of choices. He leaves the sack on the stoop, tied shut with a twist of twine. She unties it and slices the bread thin, saving some for supper. She eats quickly. There is no luxury in eating slow. When he leaves, he tips his hat again. He believes himself generous. She believes nothing. That is how the exchange works. Others arrive drunk and fall asleep mid-sentence. She has learned to handle them all. She knows when to speak, when to listen, and when to stay perfectly still. Not just coin for time, but illusion for security. She lets him believe what he wants. She keeps her silence and her power. She bit a man's hand until he bled. He left screaming. She was arrested the next morning. Public disturbance, the constable claimed. No one saw her again. A midday break with key. A laugh shared between 2 windows across the street. A letter from a cousin back home. Small things, but real. And real things matter more here than beautiful ones. But the bite mark stayed on the man's knuckle for weeks. They find a man who keeps his promises, or an inheritance from a relative, or simply the courage to run. You hear stories of farms, of markets, of small inns on quiet roads where no one asks questions. Most of them are probably lies, but some aren't, and so hope lingers, not in the air. But in the drawer beneath the bed, where a bag of saved coins gets heavier by the month, it became a kind of warning, an unspoken boundary. They talked less loudly after that. She stands behind the glass, framed in warm light, a shape in silhouette. Outside, footsteps approach. Some pass by. One stops. She stretches, washes her face in cool water, brushes her hair. She checks her coin stash. Still there, still hers. It comes in quiet forms. In the woman who helps hide a stolen purse. In the client who returns only to pay for time she didn't give. In the friend who knocks 3 times to say, "Don't open the door tonight." These are not laws. They are the rules that keep women breathing. Simply disappear. One day the curtain is drawn, the next it isn't. No farewell, just absence, the neighbors whisper. A name is muttered. Then another name takes her place. The bed is made again. The ledger continues. No page left blank. That small comfort carries more weight than any sermon ever could. Who call her darling, who ask about her past, who touch with trembling hands as if they're owed tenderness. She sees through them instantly. Pity, in this room, is more dangerous than lust. It blurs the rules, and blurred rules get women hurt. She doesn't rush. That is part of the ritual. Slowness is control. Order is safety. Nothing is wasted. Nothing left to chance. The walls know things no one else does. They've seen tears that never reached the floor. They've held laughter that didn't mean joy. They've echoed songs hummed softly just to feel less alone. The bed frame creaks when she turns. She ignores it. The noise is familiar now. A sign that the night is ending. She pulls the blanket tight and presses her cheek against the pillow, still warm from her own breath. Sleep comes slowly. The mind takes time to quiet. Faces flash behind closed eyes. Some kind, some not. Names blur. Voices drift. And then silence again. In that stillness, she dreams of markets with real sunlight, of coins that don't come with conditions, of doors that open outward to fields instead of inward to strangers. The city wakes before she does. Boots on cobblestone. Barrels roll toward morning stalls. The smell of fish and smoke seeps through the shutter. By midday, the street is alive again. The baker's boy delivers bread, avoiding eye contact but never missing a delivery. Later, a man knocks. He wears the hat of a clerk. Not poor, not rich. He smiles too much. She lets him in. Their conversation is brief. He asks for the usual. She nods. He pays without being asked. Not all customers are simple. Some talk too much. They confess things unasked, secrets of business, affairs. Some come in angry and leave apologetic. The worst are not the loud ones. The worst are the ones who pretend it's something else. She has seen women vanish, not into the countryside, not into new lives. Still, not all endings are silent. One woman, Helena, once fought back. Justice, if it exists here, is stitched into the seams of memory, and despite everything, there are moments of peace. Sometimes, a woman leaves, not many, but a few. At night, she draws the curtain open again. The lamp is lit, her hair is combed. She smiles, and the night begins again. Chapter 12, Map Makers of the World. The Dutch cartography boom. The room is quiet but alive with motion. A narrow space, half workshop, half sanctuary, lit by slanted sunlight filtering through leaded glass windows. The smell is a blend of ink, old paper, beeswax, and sea salt carried in from the harbor, just 2 streets away. In the corner stands a globe, its surface cracked and faded, seas labeled with guesses, continents shaped by rumor. You have stepped into a cartographer's studio in the heart of 17th century Amsterdam. At the table, a man leans over parchment. His fingers are stained with blue and rust-red pigment. A magnifying glass rests beside him, though he prefers to work by eye. He has been at this for hours. He will remain for hours more. Around him are compasses, calipers, brass rulers, and quill pens trimmed to hair-fine points. A single misplaced stroke can change the shape of an island, or invent one. The Dutch Republic, flush with trade and ambition, is the map-making capital of the world. Ships sail to Java, to Japan, to Suriname and back, not just to fetch goods, but to redraw the edges of what is known. Every sailor is a source of data. Every storm, every rock, every lost anchor becomes a note in a leather-bound journal that eventually finds its way here. The cartographer works from fragments. A captain's log scribbled in the rain. A Portuguese prisoner's tale of a reef that swallows ships whole. A trader's memory of a cove where parrots screamed from black cliffs. None of it is exact. But from the noise, a pattern begins to emerge. He sketches coastlines with tentative lines, labels mountains that may or may not exist, and gives names to places that already had them, long before the Dutch ever arrived. Some of these names will stick. Others will be erased by time, rewritten by conquest, or buried by maps that come later. But for now, the map is authority. What he draws becomes, for many, the truth. On the shelf behind him are laces the size of dinner trays. Richly bound in leather, their pages heavy and stiff. Some maps are plain, designed for merchants and navigators, all straight lines and measured depths. Others are luxurious, filled with curling sea monsters, ships mid-battle, and maidens representing distant lands. These are not just tools. They are art and propaganda. They tell a story of mastery, of reach, of a republic that sees everything, knows everything, charts everything. But the truth, here in the studio, is murkier. The mapmaker does not pretend to know it all. He shrugs when asked if this inlet truly exists. He guesses. He hopes. He cross-references one report with another. When he draws the southern edge of Africa, he narrows his eyes. He's never seen it. He never will. But the sketch must be finished before the deadline. A fleet sails in 2 weeks. He pauses to stretch, cracking his knuckles. Then he returns to work, adding a series of small dots along the coast. Sandbanks, perhaps. Or imagined islands? It is not a lie. It is possibility. At a nearby desk, an apprentice grinds pigment from crushed lapis lazily. The stone dust glitters in the light. Expensive, reserved for the sea. When mixed with oil and egg white, it becomes a deep, living blue that pulses when dry. The cartographer will use it sparingly, brushing it along the curved lines of the ocean, framing continents like jewels. The land is brown and green, but the sea must sing. There are risks in the work. Errors that ripple outward like dropped stones in water. A misplaced reef may ground a ship. An invented bay might lure a fleet to ruin. The mapmaker knows this. Still, he works with care, not fear. His job is not to be perfect. It is to offer shape, to suggest. A bell rings in the hall below. The post has arrived. Letters from Batavia. One includes a chart drawn on damp vellum, marked with symbols and smudged notes. He spreads it out, pinning the corners with brass weights. It shows an island not seen on earlier maps. Possibly new, possibly a mistake. He frowns, comparing it with his current draft. Something will have to move. Behind him, the apprentice dares to speak. If it's wrong, the boy asks, what happens? The cartographer does not answer right away. He dips his brush in the blue and touches the edge of a bay. Then the next map will fix it, he says. But sometimes they don't. Some islands persist in maps for decades, even centuries, without anyone ever finding them. They live in margins, in imaginations, in merchants' tales and sailors' nightmares. Phantom lands, waiting rooms for forgotten hope. The studio holds other things too. A jar of sand from the coast of Ceylon. A feather from a bird no one could name. A lock of hair tied with red thread, labeled simply Banda. Relics of voyages or trophies. Or memories too fragile to explain. You run your fingers along the edge of a finished atlas. The leather is soft from use. Inside, names flicker in faded ink Formosa, Magellanica, Zealand, Terra Australis. Some will vanish, some will become countries. All began as pencil marks on a work table, no wider than a door. Outside, church bells ring again, the hour turns. But inside the studio, time moves differently. The cartographer draws a river he's never seen. A mountain range described in a letter from a man who may have lied. And in doing so, he shapes the future, quietly, one line at a time. Maps, once finished, do not stay locked away in drawers. They move, they travel in crates and satchels, wrapped in cloth and tied with string. In some corners of these maps, you find curling phrases like terra incognita or hic sunt dracones, here be dragons. To name a bay, to mark a river, is to begin the process of claiming it. Before the flag, before the cannon, comes the quill. That small scratch of ink across parchment is the first quiet blow of colonialism. Abstract. The ink dries the same, no matter what the map is used for. These are not signs of fear. They are invitations. Empty spaces begging to be filled, not just with facts, but with possession. They hang in dining rooms and private libraries, proof that their owner is a man of the world. Guests gaze at the lines, nod thoughtfully, and remark on the boldness of Dutch discovery. A river in Brazil shifts its origin from one atlas to the next. Islands appear, then vanish. Sometimes two cities are marked in the same spot, each with a different name. The errors accumulate, but the maps continue to sell. No one notices that half the places do not exist. The cartographer, elbow deep in ink, is rarely a soldier or a sailor. Stories of lands purposely misdrawn to mislead rival companies. Islands exaggerated in size to suggest Dutch strength. Routes left incomplete to guard trade secrets. Sabotage not with swords, but with curves and lines. It is a quieter kind of war, but just as deliberate. The idea that every inlet is labeled, every danger mapped, every mystery accounted for, but the sea does not care about ink. He stretches his shoulders, wipes his fingers, and closes the ink bottle with a sigh. The last light of the day filters through the windows, painting the edges of the room in amber. And the world does not bend to borders drawn from second-hand memories. But if the errors are shared, if the shape is broadly agreed upon, then the illusion of accuracy can persist. The map may end at the edge of the page, but the world does not. The work is painstaking. Each plate must be reversed, so the image will print correctly. Not to deceive, but to claim authorship. These are secret flourishes, tiny rebellions, or perhaps quiet pride. Mistakes are costly. The plates are heavy, cold, and easily ruined. They are stored in velvet-lined boxes and guarded like treasure. A single good plate can print hundreds of maps. A flawed one can sink a voyage, a consensus of uncertainty. It is how empires are built. He may never see the lands he illustrates. He works from testimony, from reports, from whispers carried on ocean winds. Some of the maps he completes will guide missionaries. The man, old and ink-stained, simply said, "Then we update them." He did not seem bothered. To him, the world was not fixed. It was fluid like the oceans it held. A map was never final. Only current. Others will guide smugglers. Some will help ships bring back silks. Others will help them bring back slaves. They arrive at merchant houses, naval offices, town halls. A newly printed map may hang behind the desk of a VOC director, unrolled and nailed to a wall as both reference and trophy. Fantastical mountain ranges, desert roads, and settlements labeled with names plucked from fables. Some of these editions are based on the briefest of stories. A sailor glimpsed firelight on a distant shore. A merchant claimed to hear music in the fog near Sumatra. These fragments become features, as real on the page as Amsterdam itself. The ink is still faintly wet when decisions are made upon it, decisions about where to trade, where to claim, where to fight. Every map becomes a mirror of ambition. A world not as it is, but as the Dutch believe it can be. In this age of empire, to draw a place is to declare interest in it. And yet, not all who shape these maps understand or question what they do. The moral weight is distant. In the more lavish studios, those backed by powerful guild cartographers begin to include not just coastlines. But imagine geography, the buying public does not mind. These are maps for display, not navigation. There is something comforting in the illusion of knowledge. The maps begin to show inconsistencies. One version of the Cape of Good Hope curves gently, another just sharply inland. There is a quiet, unspoken understanding among map makers. No one knows the full truth. In a side room of the workshop, maps are etched onto copper plates by specialists. Sometimes a cartographer adds a hidden signature, a tiny mark shaped like a fish, a swirl inside a wave, a deliberate misspelling of a mountain's name. A curious visitor once asked a renowned map maker what he would do if someone proved his maps wrong. And there are darker corners too. In the final hour of the workday, the cartographer sets aside his pen. He steps outside. The canal shimmers in the dusk. He breathes deeply. The world feels known, measured, named, but out there, beyond the harbor, beyond the horizon, the sea remains vast and unruly. Chapter 13. Plague in the port city. The smell reaches you first. Faint at dawn, stronger by midday, unbearable by nightfall. A mix of rotting vegetables, damp straw, and something harder to name. Beneath it all lies the bitter, metallic scent of illness. You don't need to see a corpse to know the plague has returned. The air already tells you. It begins, as always, at the docks. A ship arrives from the Mediterranean, its crew gaunt and quiet. They do not look directly at the harbor workers. Their eyes are sunken, their lips cracked. The captain presents papers declaring the voyage was uneventful, but rumors travel faster than official ink. The rats know first, then the cats, then the people. The ship is ordered to anchor off the coast, but it is too late. The fleas have already come ashore, hidden in sacks of wool and barrels of spices. By the time anyone notices, the merchant who offloaded the cargo is coughing behind closed shutters. Within a week, 3 homes are boarded up in the Jordan district. The red X is painted on each door. A bucket of tar is left beside it, the stench meant to warn and to disinfect. It does neither. The sickness spreads anyway. It always finds a way. The city officials post notices, public gatherings are discouraged. Churches are instructed to limit services, schools close, markets empty. But canal boats still float quietly through the city, and barges still unload grain. Life must go on, even as it begins to unravel. In the affected neighborhoods, bells toll more frequently. A single ring for a child, 2 for a woman, 3 for a man. The sound becomes part of the background, a rhythm of mourning so steady that people stop flinching when they hear it. The gravediggers work through the night. They no longer speak to one another. They don't have to. The wealthy flee first. Carriages creak through the early fog, bound for countryside estates. They leave behind sealed letters, unpaid servants, and cupboards half full of spice. A few leave notes for the constables, asking them to guard their homes. No one does. Doctors walk the streets in masks shaped like birds, beaks stuffed with herbs and vinegar-soaked cloth. Their cloaks flap as they move door to door, knocking softly, never entering unless paid in advance. They are less healers than recorders. They take note of the dead and mark the address. If asked for a cure, they offer rest and prayer. Some offer bloodletting. Others recommend crushed emerald or leeches. A few claim to have holy relics that prevent infection. But most simply avoid touching the patients. The fear is stronger than any oath. You hear stories. A servant locked in the pantry with her sick mistress, neither seen again. A boatman who buried his entire family in 1 week, then took his own boat into the bay and set it adrift. A baker who continued to sell bread until the day he collapsed behind the counter, flour dust mingling with fever sweat. Not all responses are grim. In the quieter quarters of the city, neighbors bring food to those quarantined. A widow leaves hot broth on a doorstep and walks away before the door opens. A boy drops kindling into a cellar window where a sick man sleeps. These acts are not publicized. They are not done for praise, but they are real. The hospitals overflow. Makeshift wards are built in warehouses and empty churches. Straw mattresses line the stone floors. The moans of the sick echo against the vaulted ceilings. At night, the candlelight flickers like stars on the walls. A few nurses try to soothe the patients, wiping foreheads and murmuring prayers. Most keep their distance. They have seen too many die. No one knows the true cause. Some blame the air, thick with fog and chimney soot. Others blame foreign ships or divine punishment or bad water. A few whisper that the poor bring it, that the sick are unclean in more ways than one. These whispers grow louder as the death toll rises. Burial practices change. There's no time for coffins. The bodies are wrapped in linen, stacked in carts, and buried in trenches outside the city walls. A priest says words over each load, his voice hoarse from repetition. No names are spoken. The trenches are filled quickly, and the soil packed tight. You notice fewer birds in the sky, fewer voices on the street. The city does not scream. It dims, like a lantern running low. Shops shudder, shutters splinter, doors creak, but do not open. A silence grows between buildings. It wraps around chimneys and stoops. It waits, yet the city survives. It always does. Not because it fights the plague, but because it endures it. Brick by brick, breath by breath. In the heart of the city, the clock tower still chimes. Its bell rings out across empty squares and echoing courtyards. Not many stop to listen anymore, but the sound carries, marking time as if nothing has changed. Inside their homes, families pray behind closed doors, pressing damp cloths over their mouths and placing herbs on the windowsills. Basil for protection, sage for clarity, lavender for mercy. There is little proof these help, but doing something feels better than doing nothing. Merchants try to salvage what they can. Those who remain in the city offer discounted rates on candles, dried fruit, bolts of cloth. No one buys. No one has need for luxury when the streets are lined with mourning. A cheese vendor dies beside his cart, the wheel of Gouda beneath his arm still perfectly round. His son drags him inside without ceremony. Business ends there. The city's painters, once busy with commissions, now leave their canvases half-finished. A portrait of a smiling girl leans against the wall, her eyes too bright for this new world. Some painters try to capture what they see hastily drawn faces of plague carts. The droop of shoulders, the weight of exhaustion, but most put down their brushes altogether. Art has no voice in a city that will not look up. Letters from the countryside bring rumors of other outbreaks. Haarlem, they say, is faring no better. Utrecht has closed its gates. Some villages turn away all outsiders, no matter how desperate. There are stories of travelers being pelted with stones, of carts burned just beyond city lines. Isolation, once a punishment, has become a prize. And yet, amid this grimness, some take advantage. A few landlords raise rents on newly empty homes. Apothecaries charge double for clove oil and dried orange peel. There were whispers that certain doctors, the ones who show results or simply seem to survive, offer private visits to the wealthy in exchange for silver under the table. This quiet corruption blends into the silence of the city, unchallenged. At the same time, the poor suffer in ways statistics cannot measure. A seamstress loses her work, then her home. She takes shelter in a barn on the edge of the canal, where she sleeps beside empty barrels. She still mends clothes, trading threadwork for crusts of bread. Her hands are raw, her back bent, but she wakes up each morning and threads the needle again. In the orphanage near the old gate, a nurse writes names in a book. The pages grow heavier with ink each day. Some children do not speak at all. Others cry only when no one is watching. They play with scraps, bits of ribbon, buttons from discarded coats, half a hoop. They do not talk about their parents. That silence is a game they've learned too young. The churches ring their bells more often now. Not for celebration, but for funerals. The priests wear white linen over their robes and carry small censers of burning resin to keep the air clean. They preach about divine will, about patience, about endurance. Fewer people come each week. Not out of defiance, but fatigue. Faith, too, can wear down. Some women turn to more ancient rituals. Old songs sung under the breath, charms placed on the doorstep, bones buried beneath the hearth. These practices were once mocked or forbidden. Now they are whispered again, if only for comfort. In the guild halls, meetings are canceled. Ledgers are left open, ink dried mid-column. Profits are no longer the focus. Survival is. Some masters lose their entire crews. Workshops sit empty, tools rusting in place. But the buildings still stand, waiting for the day when they might echo with hammers again. On the outer canals, a man rows his boat slowly, dropping flowers into the water. One for his wife, one for each of his children. He does not weep. The boat moves forward with each gentle stroke. The pedals drift behind him in silence, caught in the sluggish current. And in a quiet courtyard behind a shuttered tavern, two women share a loaf of bread. One laughs, just once. It is not a bright sound, but it is real. Laughter in a time like this is not a rebellion. It is a remembrance. That life, somehow, still stirs beneath the dust. Eventually, the fever burns itself out, as it always does. The bells toll less often. The grave diggers sleep through the night. Shops begin to open again, cautiously. Bread is baked. Brooms sweep thresholds. Windows are unlatched. The city does not cheer. It exhales. The survivors walk through their streets changed. Not just in grief, but in understanding. They know now how thin the veil between life and death truly is. How much of their world depends not on walls or wealth, but on one another. On the hands that kept working, on the feet that kept walking, on the hearts that kept beating, even when the rest of the world felt still. The maps will not record this. The books of the VOC will not mark these names. But history lives in the quiet and the space between bells, in the breath that follows the silence. Chapter 14. The Artist and the Shadow. Life of a Dutch Golden Age painter. The attic smells of turpentine, dust, and wood smoke. Light spills through a single north-facing window, diffused and soft, never too direct, never too harsh. It is the painter's chosen light. Everything here depends on it. Not just mood, but truth. The first was a portrait of a merchant's wife, her pearls more real than her eyes. The second, a church interior, pale with candlelight. Neither has sold. They hang on the wall behind him, waiting for a buyer. He doesn't look at them anymore. You climb the narrow stairs, ducked beneath a cracked beam, and find yourself in a room that holds both ambition and survival. A girl appears with a folded letter and a pear. He scrapes away a layer of paint with a palette knife, revealing the underdrawing beneath. The act feels violent, necessary. Some parts of a painting must be destroyed to make room for the truth. The letter is from a patron, demanding the background of a portrait be changed. Too dark, he says, makes the sitter look severe. The painter sighs and sets his brush down. The pear is overripe, but he eats it anyway, juice dripping onto a scrap of muslin. On the windowsill, a jar of dead flowers leans sideways. Buyers prefer biblical scenes, sweeping dramas, heroic moments. But he paints a woman pouring milk, a man tying a shoelace, a child leaning on a stool. He paints life as it is, not as it pretends to be. He meant to paint them, but they decayed before he began. Angels. But the painter refuses. He'd rather starve than lie with a brush. These quiet failures line the room like ghosts, but he works among them without fear. The room is still again. For a moment, the world feels complete. The painter moves his easel closer to the window, chasing the last good light. He hums as he works, tuneless, content. The wrist, finally, looks right. The curve natural. The milkmaid's eyes now hold something quiet, resolve, maybe. Or peace. The man at the easel is silent. He's been painting since dawn. His hair is tied back with twine, and his hands are streaked with ochre and lead white. He thinks of his teacher, long dead, who told him that the trick was not to capture what is seen, but what is felt. He thinks of the boy he once apprenticed under who now paints fruit bowls for wealthy inns, earning twice what he does. He thinks of the art dealer who promised him exposure but sold his work for less than firewood. The canvas before him holds the shape of a milkmaid, pouring from a jug into a bowl. In the curve of a cheek, the texture of wood grain, the softness of morning light. He paints ordinary things because they are all he knows, and because they are enough. He cannot. The act of painting is not a choice. It is a need. When the brush moves, something settles inside him. The world narrows to a hand, a line, a shade of yellow that took 3 hours to mix just right. The background, once empty, gains shape, a rough table, a cracked tile, a window with just a hint of sky. This is the only place where everything makes sense. A wine bottle lies empty beside a jar of brushes soaking in spirits. Instead, there is the market, the fair, the gallery behind the baker's shop. Competition is endless. Painters crowd the city, each with their own style, their own following, their own debts. Every inn has a landscape above the hearth. Every merchant wants a family portrait, but only if the price is low. Fame is rare. Fortune even rarer. Coins jingle faintly in a tin box on the shelf, not many. Enough for bread and firewood if rationed carefully. The painter's world is brush and canvas, silence and doubt. He sells not necessity, but beauty. And beauty, for most, is optional. He has learned to stretch his needs like his paint. Her apron is smudged, her gaze low, her gesture eternal. The painter has repainted the wrist 3 times now. Still not right. He steps back, squints, leans forward again. This is his 3rd painting this month. His studio is a mess of pigment and linen scraps. The life of a Dutch painter is not glamorous. There are no royal patrons here, no lavish court commissions. Outside, the city pulses with trade. Ships unload spices, sugar, porcelain. But inside the attic, time stands still. A knock interrupts the stillness. He returns to work. The milkmaid's arm still feels stiff. He paints in silence, but his thoughts are loud, and yet he does not stop. Behind him, a chair holds a coat with a rip in the lining. He's meant to mend it for weeks. The milkmaid takes form slowly. Her elbow bends just so. Her thumb curls around the handle. Her dress falls in folds like real linen. It is not grandeur he seeks, not spectacle, just truth. The world outside does not care, and this makes selling hard. His dealer warns him to add color, drama, gold. The afternoon deepens. The light grows cooler. Shadows stretch along the floorboards. He steps back and wipes his hands on a rag. But the rent is due in 5 days. Days pass. The painting of the milkmaid dries slowly, its layers settling like sediment. The artist moves on to a new canvas, though he returns often to adjust a shadow or heighten the reflection in the jug. He doesn't sign it yet. He rarely signs anything until it is sold. Sometimes he doesn't sign at all. Fame feels too distant to chase, and his signature, he believes, is not what gives the painting value. Outside, the seasons shift. Rain drums on the roof above the studio. Light grows weaker, slanted, fragile. The city around him continues to churn with trade, diplomacy, invention. Sells an older canvas, one of a church interior, for half what it cost him to make. His eyes tire sooner. He squints more often, forgets where he placed his palette, takes longer to prepare his brushes. Children play in the square, their voices echoing against stone. A final adjustment to the hem of her dress. A softening of the shadow under her chin. He steps back and feels the quiet click of completion. He signs it, finally. Small, in the bottom corner. A woman laughs at her dog as it splashes through a puddle. Lamps flicker on one by one. He sketches them in his mind. Decades later, a collector discovers the milkmaid painting in a farmhouse, covered in dust. His paintings, once sold for bread, now hang in gilded frames. Viewers marvel at the softness of his light, the honesty of his subjects, the subtle sorrow beneath his colors. He recognizes the composition, the light, the brushwork. He brings it to a museum. Scholars debate its origin, compare pigments, trace sketches. They find a signature. Faint, but there. Stores the images for later. He may not paint them, but he sees them, and that is enough. The light he once loved feels dimmer, or maybe it's simply harder to chase. He doesn't argue. A painting sold is better than one unsold. He wonders quietly how long he can keep going like this. But in this attic, time folds inward. His world is still defined by brushes, stretched canvas, drying oils, and the familiar ache in his lower back. Money runs low again. He trades 2 sketches for firewood. The world he captured in brushstrokes slips away, not with violence but with stillness. Then he nods once and says it might sell well. People like simple things now, he mutters. Honest things. The painter doesn't reply. He has learned that silence can be more dignified than gratitude. The requests rarely excite him, but he treats them with care, and says it reminds her of home. She pays in full. The dealer keeps his cut. The painter receives his share in folded notes and buys food, candles, and a second-hand coat. He does not know where the painting hangs now. He doesn't ask. They copy styles that sell and paint to order. He does not blame them. But he also knows his kind is fading. It is still painting, still color on canvas, still the work that has shaped his life. He is buried in a modest grave, unmarked like so many others. His name fades quickly from conversation. His debts are cleared by the sale of a few remaining works. The rest are stacked in a storage room, forgotten. His friends have left the city or left the trade. One became a school teacher. Another now works for a merchant, painting decorative panels and signs. That another canvas was shipped to England as part of a merchant's dowry. He has never seen these homes, never met the buyers. But the thought that his work lives elsewhere, hanging in silence, pleases him more than he admits. They used to gather in the evenings, drinking and arguing about technique, color, form. Now the painter drinks alone, if he drinks at all. The conversations have been replaced by silence, and he finds he misses them less than he thought he would. Every so often he receives a commission, a small portrait, a coat of arms, a scene of a couple walking in a garden. He has no apprentice, not because he wouldn't teach, but because no one asks. The new generation wants fame fast, coin faster. He's heard that some of his older works have ended up in foreign homes, that a man in Harlem hangs one in his drawing room. Still, the years press on him. His hands don't move as quickly. In the evenings, he sits by the window and watches the street below. One morning, he finishes the milkmaid painting. Not with a grand moment, not with applause or triumph, simply with a breath. He takes it to his dealer, who studies it in silence. He says nothing at first. Weeks pass. The painting sells. A merchant's wife sees it in the shop window. Eventually, the painter grows old. His hands tremble. The pigments lose their vibrancy. His vision falters. He paints less, reads more, sleeps more. He dies in winter. There is no funeral. A neighbor finds him, wrapped in a blanket beside a canvas he never finished. But time is not always kind, nor is it always cruel. Soon the painter's name returns. It appears in articles, catalogs, lectures. No one remembers his debts, his hunger, his attic. But they remember his work. And in that quiet endurance and the way paint outlives flesh, he finds a kind of immortality. Now, the candles burn low, the city quiets. The sails are furled, the ledgers closed. The paintings dry. Across Amsterdam, the canal water laps gently against the mooring posts, carrying with it the breath of 1,000 forgotten stories. You have walked with shipbuilders, bent under weight and tar. You have stood at sea, wind-chapped and salt-scoured. You have watched as mutiny tore men apart on reefs far from home. You've entered counting houses, smelled ink and ambition, and read the lines where human lives were translated into profit. You've stood silent and stunned before the doors of the plague houses, heard bells ring for strangers whose names are gone. You V-traced maps that reshaped the earth and walked past red-lit windows where history lingered in the eyes of women whose names never entered the books. You've seen a bulb destroy a fortune, watched a city freeze, crack, and thaw again. And through it all, you moved like a shadow never noticed, never stopping the wheel, only observing the rhythm of lives once lived. That rhythm slows now. History is so often imagined as loud, dramatic, sharp-edged. But the truth lies in the in-between places. The quiet hammering before dawn, the worn hands gripping a paintbrush. The empty street during a frost fair's last day. The creak of wood beneath the weight of a sailor who knows the storm is coming, but scrubs the deck anyway. Most of the people you've met tonight are gone, their names uncarved. Their stories survived only through fragments, the way a beam was joined to a hull, the way a map misspelled an island, the way a woman looked out a tavern window just once and caught the painter's eye. These are the pieces left behind, the soft shadows that follow real lives. And now you return from that world, back from the cold decks, the tar-black docks, the flickering studios, the counting rooms that weighed profit heavier than breath. You return to your quiet room, where the walls are still and the night is kind. The world you live in no longer reeks of plague pits or coal smoke. You're not woken by bells tolling for the dead. You do not sleep 5 to a room above a freezing warehouse, wondering if the floor will hold. You do not have to count bulbs or barrels to measure your worth. You are not pressed into service by a shipmaster or bought and sold on ledgers inked by men who never saw the pain they caused. Tonight you rest in comfort, in safety. You listen not for footsteps on a creaking stair or cannon fire across foreign waves, but to the soft hum of the present, the warmth of a blanket, the slow rhythm of breath, the knowledge that you are far, far from those centuries of toil and frost and flame, and yet those people lived. They breathed, just like you do. They hoped. They failed. They laughed at things we'll never understand. They feared things we've forgotten how to name. And from their world, imperfect and often cruel, something beautiful emerged: cities, art, records, stories, echoes, the bones of a world that shaped this one. So now, as your eyes grow heavy, let that weight carry you. Let it drift like a boat slipping from its moorings. You are safe here. You are far from Amsterdam smoke. You are far from the cry of the watchman, far from the splash of cold harbor water. Let it all fade. You do not have to hold on to the whole story. Just a moment, a thread, a single image. A lamplight falling across a ship's hull. A woman pouring milk. A child skating on a frozen canal, unaware the ice beneath him is beginning to crack. Hold one of those just lightly, like a whisper. Then let it go. Let the memory float downstream to join the rest. The past is quiet now, and so are you. Good night. Thank you for drifting through history with us. If you enjoyed this quiet journey into the past, gently tap subscribe and let the drowsy historian be your guide whenever sleep feels far away. Until next time, rest well, dream deeper, and remember, history is never in a hurry.